So Cynthia, you want to skip to the Zoom housekeeping rules first, is that correct?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's do that first. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining this workshop. Before we jump in, I'd like to go over a few Zoom housekeeping rules. First and foremost, please keep yourself muted during all presentations and when you're not speaking. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by raising your hand with the reactions button, and that's at the bottom of your screen, and Todd will call on you. If you don't see that at the bottom, you may have an older version of Zoom, and it may be an option by your name in the participant list. If you are joining by phone, you can raise or lower your hand by dialing *9 and then unmuting and muting yourself by dialing *6. So *9 for raising your hand and lowering it, and *6 for muting and unmuting. You can also include any questions or comments in the chat, as we'll be monitoring it during the presentations and panel discussions. We do also have live Spanish interpretation available for Spanish speakers. Our interpreters today are Leticia and Fabiola, and they'll be keeping an eye out on or listening to any Spanish questions or comments that come in, but we'll also be monitoring the chat as I mentioned previously. You can join the Spanish line by selecting the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen with the globe icon, and then click Spanish if you want to join the Spanish channel. And if you want to hear the Spanish only, you can click mute original audio as well. Unfortunately, language interpretation on Zoom is not available for those calling in by phone, so you will have to join on a computer. So to all panelists and participants, since we are having live interpretation, please be sure to speak clearly and steadily for our interpreters to understand. And last but not least, please note that this meeting is being recorded and that the recording will be shared publicly online. And that's it. I will pass it over to Cynthia now. Cynthia, it's all you.
I'm going to turn off my video because I have some connectivity issues. So good morning, everybody. My name is Cynthia Babich, and I'm the director of the Del Amo Action Committee, a grassroots community group working in the unincorporated Los Angeles County for over 28 years. I'm also the co-coordinator, along with Robina Sewell, for the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network, which was formed by frontline environmental justice communities and advocates over 17 years ago. We have been meeting monthly since then to mentor and help each other with issues in common, as well as ones specific to the communities we serve. We have worked together on toxic tours, ground truthing projects, groundwater convenings, rulemakings at several different agencies, policy and legislative issues, as well as these environmental justice enforcement symposiums, this one being our 8th annual. Over time, our groups have been joined in these efforts by many partners from state, local, and federal agencies, regulators, academics, and many others. We seek participation from individuals who are acting change agents for environmental justice in the circles they work in. The past 11 years, we have focused on problem solving around many of the issues we have been working on for decades by applying boots on the ground knowledge to agency policy goals. We hope these efforts will help attain environmental clarity, which we believe will lead to equity, justice for our communities. We have found that to build a common ground, it is critical to create safe spaces like our symposiums. As we work to explore and understand different perspectives and approaches to protecting our environmental justice communities and the health of all Angelenos. We are called to a collective sense of action and our deep-rooted desire to do what is needed to save our environmentally impacted communities, which most often hanging by a thread. We have a team of community and agency representatives within the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network that plan our symposiums. This year's team is comprised of Robina Swool, California Safe Schools, Mary Zakrasik, our special symposium assistant, Stephanie Lewis, Department of Toxic Substances Control, Jessica Brown and Rosa Borelli, Los Angeles City Attorney, Todd Sachs, his enforcement team, and Deldy Reyes of the California Air Resources Board, Katie Butler, Senior Health Deputy, Office of Supervisor Janice Hahn, Joe Liu, Coalition for Clean Air, myself and Florence Garibian, Del Amo Action Committee, Jennifer Malone, Los Angeles County General Counsel, Kristen McKinley and Rachel Zellwinger, California Environmental Protection Agency, and Susanna Ludigas, the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. Creating the space to hear each other will allow us to continue to develop solutions in collaboration. We believe this will lead to real and measurable change in the policies of agencies charged with the protection of our most vulnerable communities. This is that kind of space. Who's in the room with us today? Over 130 have registered, representing 21 environmental justice and community advocacy groups, 9 universities and unions, 7 consultants and foundations, 5 enforcement agencies and prosecutors, 5 water protectors, 2 air regulation agencies, 6 state and federal agencies, 5 Los Angeles County departments, 2 Los Angeles City departments, and 3 local, state, and federal representatives. The interest in the symposium workshop, as stated by the registrants, 52% want to learn more about SEPs, 28% are working hard to learn more about how to collaborate with environmental justice communities, 13 are interested in collaboration with other agencies, and 7 are just plain interested in the work of the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network. The continued symposium sponsors provide the resources to allow community voices to take a lead role in our series of virtual discussions around the nexus of environmental justice and enforcement. They are Community Environmental Services, California Air Resources Board, Earth Justice, Los Angeles City Attorney, California Environmental Protection Agency, Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors Sheila Kuehl, Janice Hahn, Holly Mitchell, and Hilda Solis, South Coast Air Quality Management District, Cal Recycle, and the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network, who with open ears and a passion for justice welcomes you to this space. It is now my pleasure to introduce an amazing collaborator, Todd Sachs, who will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. Todd?
Thank you, Cynthia, and welcome to today's symposium. So my name is Todd Sachs. I am Chief of CARB's Enforcement Division, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about supplemental environmental projects and other funding opportunities that are available to local communities. And thank you to Helena and the team for managing the Zoom through this symposium. So today we're focusing on funding opportunities for local communities. Those of you working in the environmental justice field know the profound and ongoing struggles communities have and continue to face with the impacts of air and water pollution, toxics, and the legacy of poor land use planning. Acknowledging and addressing environmental inequities and injustices is among the highest priorities of most state and local government environmentally oriented agencies in California, and learning from the hard work that community groups have been doing over the past several decades, we all know that we have a lot of work to do. One focus of many agencies has been working to support local communities at the grassroots level, and today, there are relatively new programs which are being expanded that provide new opportunities for local communities to implement projects that reduce pollution, reduce exposure to pollution, offer educational opportunities, and help build capacity at the grassroots level to better empower communities. We will be talking about supplemental environmental projects, and about related community grant programs, both of which are expanding to meet these needs. These programs will be described in the coming discussion. Our goal today is to raise awareness of these opportunities among community organizations and to help build bridges between governments and communities to expand access to and use of these funds for the benefit of public health, especially in our most impacted communities. So next slide, please. And next one. And next one. Okay. So today's program is going to be split into 4 parts. First, you will hear an overview of what Supplemental Environmental Projects, or SEPs for short, are, and how they are increasingly being used to support community priorities. You will also hear about community grant programs available at the California Environmental Protection Agency and the California Air Resources Board, which aim to serve essentially the same goals as many supplemental environmental projects programs. Second, you will hear a discussion among representatives of government agencies that have supplemental environmental projects programs. We will discuss how these programs work and how SEPs are used. Third, you will hear a discussion among community groups who have received SEPs, as well as private organizations that both distribute and receive SEPs. You'll learn how these programs have worked from the community perspective and also challenges in the implementation of these programs. Finally, we will put all the pieces together, discussing what we've heard in terms of what works and potential programmatic improvements that might make access to programs easier and help make them more successful. Today is a working meeting, and your presence here, each of you, makes you a participant, and your voices are important to this discussion. So thank you for coming today, and please feel free to ask questions in the chat or raise your hand when appropriate. We want to hear from you. That's the main point of today's discussion. So with that, let me introduce the first panel. In the first panel, we are providing an introduction to supplemental environmental.
So we're hearing you on the English line. Can you switch back to the Spanish channel, please?
Okay. Okay. Do we want to test that, or are we good to, okay. So I'm pleased today to welcome 3 speakers. We will start with Linda Cedillo, who will introduce the concept of SEPs. Linda Cedillo is an air pollution specialist with the California Air Resources Board and leads staff for its Supplemental Environmental Projects program implementation. She is a native of the Imperial and Mexicali Valleys and has served CARB's Enforcement Division since 2018. Prior to her time with the state, she served as an air pollution control engineer and environmental coordinator with the Imperial Air Pollution Control District. She has worked with students from disadvantaged and vulnerable communities in different capacities as a teacher, facilitator, and volunteer on both sides of the border. Next, Dr. Vanessa Galaviz will introduce the Cali PA Small Grants Program. Dr. Galaviz is an environmental justice public health scientist in the Office of the Secretary at the California Environmental Protection Agency. Her work focuses on public health issues related to environmental disparities in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. She is Mexican American and experienced firsthand the struggles of living in an underserved community in Los Angeles, and was first in her family to attend college and graduate school. Dr. Galaviz has experience in multiple aspects of the public health field, including determinants of health, biomarkers of exposure and susceptibility, cumulative impacts, industrial hygiene, exposure assessment, participatory research, community science, and science policy work. Finally, Natalie Reevy will introduce the California Air Resources Board's Community Air Grant Program. Natalie is an air pollution specialist with the California Air Resources Board's Office of Environmental Justice. Natalie is the lead staff for the AB 617 Community Air Grants Program. Natalie holds a Master of Environmental Management degree and a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Economics and Conservation and Resource Studies. Natalie has been with CARB since 2019 and lives in Sacramento with her husband, son, and dog. So let's get started. Linda?
Thank you, Todd. Give me 1 second to go to my slide. Buenos días. Mi nombre es Linda Cedillo. Good morning. My name is Linda Cedillo. I work, as Todd mentioned, for the Air Resources Board Enforcement Division in the coordination of our enforcement program implementation. Today, I'll be sharing some useful information on what a SEP is, what's their purpose, and what's their importance. Next slide, please. Thank you. Historically, SEPs were projects that were chosen by violators and that typically funded on-site emission reductions or training programs for regulators. However, that concept has evolved, especially since 2015 with AB 1071, which redefined a SEP as an environmentally beneficial project that someone subject to an enforcement action would voluntarily agree in a settlement agreement to offset some of a civil penalty. This is intended to direct additional resources for disadvantaged communities to appropriately address environmental health impacts through its implementation. Today, many SEPs are designed to directly benefit those impacted by the harms caused by environmental violations in an effort to build equity and address environmental justice. SEPs may reduce pollutant emissions and community exposure, promote environmental restoration and protection, provide education and compliance training, assist the community in monitoring efforts, and last but not least, SEPs can provide resources to build capacity in community groups. Understanding capacity building as a process of developing the skills, instincts, abilities, process, and resources that organizations and communities need to survive, adapt, and thrive in a fast-changing world. This means that an organization has the sufficient number of staff who possess the necessary knowledge and skills, appropriate and adequate technical and management skills, suitable physical infrastructure, and financial and other resources.
To provide Angelenos with both ongoing and new services. So thank you.
Capacity building is not limited to the training personnel or the provision of technical assistance, but it may include revamping systems, physical infrastructure, recruiting new personnel, and improving the efficiency of those that are existing resources. Next slide, please. Thank you. AB 1071 requires all Cali PA boards, departments, and offices to develop an environmental justice SEP policy. BDOs must convene a public process to solicit SEPs from environmental justice communities, allowing up to 50% of the final settlement amount to fund SEPs. AB 1071 also requires BDOs to create an annual list of environmental justice projects that may be funded through a SEP. Cali PA compiles all this list of eligible projects and posts it on their website. SEP implementation policies must consider the relationship between the location of the violation and the proposed project. Next slide, please. Thank you. Community participation is very important for SEPs as the project concept comes from community groups and are implemented by them. Every community is different and has unique environmental challenges. Your participation in the program will help us fund projects that identify and address those specific pollution burdens. SEPs can be structured to promote equity and build capacity. A good example for this is the ability of the program to fund the building of resiliency hubs, education and training for community members, youth involvement in environmental restoration projects, local partnership with schools to leverage youth involvement, technical training, just to mention a few. Another highlight is that these funding mechanisms may be combined with other funding sources to complete a project. This means that you have the flexibility to seek funds through other programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So we will move over to Vanessa Galaviz.
Hi. So I'm going to talk about the EJ small grants. We only have 2 slides. So this is, we don't offer SEPs at KLPA, we do offer EJ Small grants. So on the next slide, please. So we have this EJ Small Grants was established in 2002, and the purpose was to provide assistance, financial assistance to nonprofit organizations, as well as federally recognized tribes. And just a couple examples of the focus areas that we have funded. So developing community-led solutions to climate change, improving access to safe and clean water, reducing pollution, exposure to pesticides and toxic chemicals, and promoting resource conservation. Next slide, please. So historically, we've been we've awarded 50,000 in max in grants per awardee every year. And we typically have either 12 to 18 term grant length. It's a competitive basis, so we have the grants are reviewed. And currently, however, we do have an increase of funding. I am not, so we don't have a grant manager right now, so we're in the process of kind of trying to figure this out. There's Bitha Becker, who is the deputy secretary. I work on her team, and there's 2 of us on our team. So we are, with all this increase of funding, we're trying to figure out how to restructure the program, because we want to be able to maximize, provide more than $50,000 per awardee for each grant. And so what's that going to look like? Well, we're going to do some proposed rulemaking. So we're working with our lawyers right now to try to figure that out. And we've been able to have great assistance from other BDOs who are expert in this area. So there is going to be a comment period for the draft restructuring coming soon. So hopefully we hear from anyone who's interested in providing us feedback on how to restructure and give out this money. Since there is a ton more money to give out, we have about $10 million in more. And so if the next slide, I believe, is the, the first 2 slides before, I think, was the contact information. Yes. So if you want to be on the listserv to get updates on this, you get email EJ grants at KOEPA, and we'll be happy to put you on the listserv, and that way you could get updates regarding any comment period, and also when the new solicitation for this new funding will be for the next fiscal year. And then these are 2 other contacts if you want to be on the listserv for tribal and for EJ. And yes, that's all I have for EJ Small Grants. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. So our next speaker is going to be Natalie Reevy, talking about the Community Air Grants program at CARB.
Thanks,
Natalie.
Todd. Hey, everyone. My name is Natalie Reevy. I have more than 2 slides, but I will try to go quickly since my focus today is on SEPs. So I guess next slide, we'll go right into it. Yeah, so one piece of AB 617 is the Community Air Grant Program. So our grants kind of fund projects that provide support for California-based community organizations and tribes across the state. They help awardees deepen their participation in the 617 process and really to build capacity for communities to become those active partners to identify, evaluate, and reduce exposure in their communities. So while our grants are funded through AB 617, our scope is broader and more far-reaching than 617. Grantees don't solely have to be located in that community. Rather, these grants fund projects in disadvantaged communities throughout the state. Next slide. So these are just some examples of types of projects that we funded through our program. So far we've awarded $25 million to almost 100 grants to the community-based organizations and tribes throughout the state. So we have another $10 million available for later this year for another round of funding. To stay up to date on the solicitation and kind of when we're going to post it all, you can subscribe to our EJ blog, which was on the first slide, but I'll also put it in the chat when I'm finished presenting today. So you have that handy. So next slide. So these are some of our program really prioritizes projects that focus on equitable public participation, local partnership building and coordination, resource leveraging, workforce development, and really environmental justice within the context of California's air quality policies. in order to maximize benefits to disadvantaged communities and to really provide that direct, meaningful, and assured benefits to priority populations, our community air grants are wholly located in disadvantaged or low-income communities or on tribal lands. Next slide. So we have three broad categories funded under community air grants: educational, technical, and targeted projects. So educational projects would include those like community engagement, air quality education, and support projects. Technical projects would include, air monitoring and modeling and technical training. And then targeted projects include emissions reduction strategy development and expansion and community air monitoring plan development, just to name some broad categories of types of projects that are funded under the program. So next slide. So this slide shows, I know it's really small. I think we're going to share the slides at the end of this, or you can email me. I can put my contact in at the end of this if you want a more zoomed in version of it all. I see that there was a chat in there about that as well. So this slide really just shows the list of our most recent awardees. And I kind of just included this to show that, the selected projects do reflect that kind of diverse needs across the state. And really include that community-driven air monitoring, improving public access to information about local pollution sources, reducing community exposure, kind of tracking progress on pollution reduction efforts. And then I think one more slide, Yeah, so one more slide, just last slide for me for the day. Just wanted to wrap it up with a couple of photos just to highlight some of our past projects to just show the variety of the types of projects that we funded. But I will stop there and I will put that information in the chat now as well. So thanks everyone. Back to you, Todd, I think, or Helena maybe? Todd.
Yeah, I think it's me. Thanks, Natalie. So thank you to everyone on the panel for that overview. I think just to summarize what you all heard, there's a couple things. So we're talking about two sort of separate but related things. One of them are supplemental environmental projects. Supplemental environmental projects essentially to somebody who gets them feels like a grant, but it arises from an agreement with a violator and a government entity that is in an enforcement action with that responsible party, that violator. And then in addition to that, we have these community grant programs that are run through Cal EPA and through CARB that are designed to also serve a similar function with regards to local grassroots community groups to support addressing environmental injustice, reducing emissions and the like. So there's a lot of opportunities here for local community groups to who are already involved or who want to get involved to also get funding to be able to further the types of work that they want to do. So with that, I have a question for the panel, and I'm not sure who can answer this, but I guess the first question I have is we've talked a little bit about building capacity in community groups. What types of activities does a community group need to be able to do to be able to participate in these programs? And what does building capacity look like in the context of one of these projects?
Oh, sorry. Someone else can start.
I'm happy to answer for Cal EPA and the EJ small grants.
That would be great. Thank you, Vanessa.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to start my video.
Just
to clarify, so just to clarify the question, how
it's really about building capacity, and what does that look like, and what types of projects can help do that?
Yes, absolutely. So for the EJ small grants, we fund anything and everything related to a community dealing with water, or dealing with, say they want to fund support high school students, helping them with any projects they have in the community. So we fund organizations if they want to. So it depends on what the capacity of the organization is, and if there is not much capacity, we still support grants to them, because we want to support you. We want to give you money to be able to improve your capacity. Again, whether that's doing more with your community residents, or doing more within your organization, or trying to really build that support for, youth engagement. And so, yes, from small projects to big projects, we fund, up to, we've had projects submitted for $15,000. We have projects submitted for $50,000. So really, it's just, we look at the projects, and whatever we feel is, going to be, really meaningful to the community and to the residents is, what we want to prioritize.
So Vanessa, I know you mentioned in your presentation that you had increased funding over the next several years for the program. Does that increase the value of the projects you can fund, or does it increase the number of the projects you can fund, or potentially both?
Potentially both. And so that's what we're trying to think right now, how to restructure the program to maximize both. So we're, Bitha and I and my colleague who's also on Bitha's team, we're working closely with the lawyers to kind of figure out what that looks like. And so, and that's why we really hope to get this, policy making through. That way we could allow public comment as to, what is really going to benefit you, not based off of what we think is going to benefit you, but what's going to benefit you. So, it'd be really exciting for anybody, to comment on how we should restructure this program to maximize both of those.
Great, thank you. A related question for the entire panel. So when a community group is applying for a SEP project or a grant, is there support that the governments can provide to help formulate that grant, or is there any process for for helping people along in that, or do you just accept the grant or the SEP project as it's applied? How does that process work? What does it look like?
I can jump in there if that's okay, Todd.
Sure.
Okay, so CARB SEP team offers that option, well, both options. The community groups can come with their own idea and have it. Sometimes they have a superstructure and defined objective, and we're available all the time to walk them through the process. So that could be like kind of a hybrid, but mostly having the community leading that development of the idea, or having something already pre-structured. We've had other cases where we have conversations with community groups. We present the program, what the funding process looks like, and they just have a problem, right? They know that there's something that can be fixed or can be improved within their community. We work with them, present some previous projects that have been successful, and also share with them what challenges they might encounter during that development. But we walk them to structure a SEP proposal. And during the while they prepare that proposal, which is a document that's available publicly in our website, we are always available to help them fill out the blanks and clarify any questions they might have. Regarding the idea on the project, again, based on the air pollution or the challenges that they're experiencing, we can share some previous projects that have been developed, or we help them brainstorm and find out like new ideas or new ways that those can be addressed.
Thank you.
Same here. Oh, sorry, Todd.
Great. No, please go ahead.
No, same with us. We provide support both, with the administrative aspect of the grant, also with the scientific aspect of the grant. So yeah, same as what Linda was talking about. We provide that support from beginning to end. Yes.
And I will just add in for air grants quickly before we move on, since you asked all three of us, Todd. So we will post our draft request for applications, and during that period, we'll provide workshops, try to reach out and speak with as many applicants as we can about their specific projects, and try to provide that support. We're also in the process of putting our most recent list of awardees, their scopes of work and timelines up on the website, so folks can kind of see what previous awardees, some of their projects kind of look like a little more specifically. And then also this year, we're doing something a little different where we are trying to do that kind of cross collaboration, and maybe we'll talk about it later, but there will be another section in the air grants application where we will send projects that we'll send projects over to the SEP team with Linda as well. So if we're not able to fund all the projects that have applied, there will be an option to kind of another life or another round for the project to potentially get funded. So just a couple of pieces I wanted to flag. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. I had another question related, and I think this is mostly for you, Linda. And then we'll go to the participants here on the, to the attendees and see what questions we have from the public. But one question first. So, part of your presentation, Linda, talked about how the concept of supplemental environmental projects has evolved, that it used to be something that was primarily something proposed by the person who is the subject of an enforcement action to do something at their own site, for example. But that with AB 1071, the focus has really shifted to be more focused on trying to address environmental injustice issues, trying to reduce exposure to pollution, building capacity and educational programs in communities. Can you describe what that transition looked like? Especially so that maybe because not all government agencies operate SEPs in the way the Cal EPA BDOs, boards and departments do. So what did that transition look like, and what has been the experience that you've had in working with community groups? Why is it something that's good to do?
Thank you, Todd. So I'll start with the transition. We have what was called legacy SEPs that were I think no more than 5 SEPs that received all the money. And those were very focused on specific projects that were intended for training. And that was before my time with CARB, but as far as I know, there was one for bus replacement. Once those were closed and there was a rebound for the program, the approach shifted, and now we have that closer communication, and that's our intent, to conduct more outreach, have more community engagement where we can hear what their challenges are, what problems they're experiencing, and provide support, as it has been the case also for AB 617. Some of these problems are not directly air pollution related, but we try to help them address them. How? By directing them to the right governmental agency that they need to contact. Sometimes there's a need for to leverage efforts with other community groups in the area. It will depend on the specific case for that community group. And what's been the experience on working closely with community groups? I guess it's that fact that we can hear and we don't experience firsthand. Hopefully we can go out now that world's going back to normal, to have walk around your community and hear from you directly. You can point that out. But so far, throughout these past couple of years, it's been a really good tool to have this availability to do online connection. We've been able to reach a lot more communities. That this is limited what we can learn with narrative, but it's helpful for us because we've been able to identify what are the hotspots, where are the areas where we can help the most, and try to spread out the word through any meeting, AB 617, through these symposiums, where we can share what the possibilities are and what the limitations are for the program. Because as you know, the SEP program, it's not a grant. We don't have the money. And so we try to be very transparent as well with community groups and share what can be done and what will be our limitations. So yes, building that trust also has helped us a lot. We know that there are a lot of bumps in the road that we have to sort out, as well as community groups. So we try to do it together to build that relationship and be able to solve those problems together.
Great. Thank you, Linda. I will just note that, one of the things that's been really helpful, I think, so the SEP programs in this transition has helped build bridges to community groups. And, all of us who are involved in this environmental space, our job is to protect public health. Having these connections with local community groups and building these programs not only helps us support community groups, but in the process also helps us be better educated about the issues we're trying to solve in communities and the issues that we should be working on. So I can say that, at least from our perspective at CARB, it's been a really beneficial and ongoing learning experience. So with that, I would like to go to all of you who are participating in today's discussion. If you have a question at this point, please feel free to type it into the chat or to raise your hand, and we'd be happy to have the panel address them. So if you have a question now, please raise your hand. So let's see. Okay, one question I see in the chat is, would it be possible to get soil remediation of residential yards contaminated with lead and other toxic metals paid for through a grant?
So sorry, what was the question?
The question is, would it be possible to get soil remediation of residential yards contaminated with lead and other toxic metals paid for through a grant?
Yes, we've funded projects that, anywhere from finding what the issue is to, also solution-based, such as, removing any toxic contaminants. So yes.
Thank you. So Sofia Quinones, you have your hand up. Okay, we'll come back to Sophia. There's a question in the chat from Emiliano Amaro. Are there examples of projects that are coordinated between community organizations and elementary or secondary education? Oops, I was reading it. And I'm thinking about project-based learning and funding available for community science education.
I can respond to that one from the SEP program perspective. We have funded the Kids Making Sense. It's a systematic program that operates throughout the state in different areas. We have one in Southern California, one in Northern, and recently we have a new in the LA area. And that's basically, I think it's middle school, and it's for the monitoring efforts. They teach children what air pollution is and how that those efforts can help them build knowledge on their communities and what their problems are and how to solve them. We have funded another project that's for education that's in LA that is more structured. The name escapes my memory now, but it's like a science project that's ongoing, and they bring the kids into that. It's kind of like a museum, I would say. So yes, the short answer is yes, that can be funded. And those are a couple of examples. If you would like to hear about the details again, and you would like to leverage some of the elements that they have implemented, feel free to reach to us and we'll be happy to share.
And I will just add to that and say community air grants also, we definitely have projects that do kind of community-based outreach, capacity building with youth, with schools, elementary and middle, high school students as well. I won't take up too much time, but if you want to chat Emiliano about specific examples, I will put kind of our air grants contact information in the chat as well, and can talk about more specific examples if that's helpful.
Thank
and
you,
same
Natalie.
with sorry, Todd.
No, go ahead, Vanessa.
Same with Kelly Pay EJ Small Grants. And an example is we funded a 6-week summer training institute to advance leadership and technical skills and civic engagement. They worked with residents, but also with the youth of Southeast Los Angeles. That's just one example, but absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. So your next question, this one is from Rita Loof. It says the RadTech Association represents technologies that reduce toxics and volatile organic compounds. It's a business group with an environmental stewardship mission. Is there a role for such an organization in any of these programs, or is it restricted to community groups?
I can start. I'll speak from the SEP program perspective. That's something that we need to, again, go on a case-by-case basis. We do that determination, but it sounds like it could be. However, we always encourage whoever is applying for a SEP to submit a letter of support and have that partnership with the community group. So if it is not currently like a community-based organization, it's very important for us that you have the support and the knowledge and the backup of a local community group with your project.
So
Thank
for for Cali, PA, we so in organizations that are tax exempt under the Federal Internal Revenue Code Section 501c4, and well, so yeah, you have to show proof of that you're a nonprofit or a tribal organization for us for the EJ Small Grants.
And the same for the community air grants, but the association, if you partnered, like Linda was saying, like with a community-based group or a tribe, you know, that might be a route.
Yeah, same here. Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, same here.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to go back to Sofia Quinones. Let's see. Sophia, are you able to take yourself off mute? Or Helena, is there a way to check that?
I think we just asked Sophia you to unmute. I think you have to unmute yourself though.
So Sophia should be on either the top or the bottom of your Zoom menu bar. You'll see on the left corner the mute and unmute button. And if that's not working, you can also include your question in the chat as well.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anybody who's listening today? Okay. Sophia, if you type your comment into the chat, we'll try to get it addressed during this. And if not, we'd be happy to follow up with you separately. So do want to make sure we get your question answered, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay. So let's move now on to first of all, let me thank everyone on the first panel. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Dr. Galaviz, and thank you, Natalie, for your participation today. Appreciate it. And we'll be coming back to you towards the end of the discussion in the fourth panel. So thank you. With that, let's now pivot to the government panel discussion. So the goal of this part of the discussion is to hear from different representatives of government agencies that offer SEPs to learn how their programs work. We are joined by an extensive and wide-ranging panel today, including Jessica Brown, Russ Colby, Bobby Valencia, Warren Hawkins, Mary Reichert, Karen Cotting, and Joel Jones. So I'm going to start by introducing each one. Excuse me. Jessica Brown works at the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, where she is the supervisor of the Environmental Justice and Planning Unit. Ms. Brown has been working in government as a litigator for over 20 years, practicing in a variety of areas of law. Since 2010, Ms. Brown has been in the Environmental Justice and the Special Litigation Units at the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, where she was lead counsel on a number of the city attorney's high-profile prosecutions, including the People versus Southern California Gas. For her work in prosecuting fish and wildlife violations, Ms. Brown was named the California Fish and Wildlife 2018 Prosecutor of the Year. From 2008 to 2010, Ms. Brown was assigned to the civil branch of the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office in the Police Litigation Unit. In that unit, Ms. Brown defended the City of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Police Department. Prior to joining the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, Ms. Brown was a deputy district attorney in Riverside County. There, she was assigned to a variety of different prosecution units, including the Consumer Fraud Unit, Economic Crimes Unit, Sexual Assault and Child Abuse Unit, and the Juvenile Division. Russ Colby has worked for the Los Angeles Water Board for the past 21 years and is currently the manager of the Compliance and Enforcement Section. Bobby Valencia has been working as an environmental scientist for the Los Angeles Regional Water Board's Enforcement Unit for 8 years. She works with the Rose Foundation on the Los Angeles Community Water Justice Grants Program and maintains a list of available supplemental environmental projects for the region. Warren Hawkins is the manager of the Community and Outreach and Enforcement section in the California Air Resources Board's Enforcement Division. Warren has worked with the Air Resources Board for nearly 17 years. His section implements CARB Supplemental Environmental Projects programs, which funds community-based projects from settlements of violations of CARB's regulations. Prior to overseeing this section, Warren implemented various on-road heavy-duty diesel programs, including enforcement of CARB rules, to outreach and education programs. Warren has 3 granddaughters that he loves to spend time with and is looking forward to the summer camping season to take them fishing. Mary Reichert is a Senior Deputy District Counsel at the South Coast Air Quality Management District, where she has practiced for 10 years. Prior to her time at the South Coast AQMD, she was a fellow at Shute, Mahaley, and Weinberger LLC in San Francisco. She has her law degree from Tulane Law School with a certificate in environmental law and clerked for a federal district judge in New Orleans after law school. Mary works on a variety of issues at the South Coast AQMD, including hearing board matters, prosecuting and settling rule violations, rule development, and CEQA review and litigation. Karen Cotting is currently the Assistant Chief of the Special Operations Section for the Los Angeles County Fire Department's Health Hazardous Materials Division, which is the Certified Unified Program Agency, or CUPA, for LA County. She is the Section Manager of HHMD's Investigations, Site Mitigation, and California Accidental Release Program units. She has a master's degree in environmental and occupational health from Cal State University Northridge and has 28 years of experience working in the environmental health field for LA County. Joel Jones is the Deputy Director of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division in US EPA Region 9. Joel started his career as a presidential management intern in EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. in 1993 and joined the regional office 4 years later. Joel has served in several management positions in Region 9 since 1998 and previously managed the Safe Drinking Water Act, Clean Air Act, RCRA, and TSCA enforcement programs. Joel graduated from the University of Michigan in 1991 with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and received his master's degree from the University of Texas, Austin, Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs in 1993. Joel was born and raised in Iowa City, Iowa, and currently lives in San Mateo, California, with his wife, Nancy, and 2 children. So I'd like to get started by asking everyone on the panel how your SEP programs work and how you've used it in the past. So I'm going to go roughly in the order that that I just introduced you, and I'll call on each one of you. So let's start with Jessica. Jessica, so just to reiterate the question, how does your SEP program work and how have you used it in the past?
Hey everybody. So real quick, I'm a lawyer, can't help myself, the technical stuff. I'm speaking as Jessica Brown, not as my elected Mike Fuhrer, but I do work at the city attorney's office. Traditionally, our program, our SEP funding, we don't run a SEP grant program within the office. We fund programs throughout the state through lawsuits. And there's really 2 avenues to do that. We have statewide or multi-jurisdictional cases. And those tend to be focused on enforcement. So training of law enforcement, training of regulators, training of prosecutors, increasing enforcement capacity has been the focus of those. Locally, when we have a case, we look to different avenues for investing in SEPs and putting that money back into different areas. Because we don't have the capacity to vet programs, we're always looking for other places to put that money. We have used the Cali PA Small Grants Fund in the past. One of the challenges for us there is that doesn't come, we can't guarantee that money comes back to the Los Angeles area, which is important to us since we're the city attorney for the city of Los Angeles. We have also put SEP money to existing funds. The pollution account, the California Fish and Wildlife pollution account, and things like that. We have started to change things and have done some different things here and there. In the SoCal gas prosecution, which we prosecuted jointly with the Attorney General, CARB, and the County Council of Los Angeles, we did set up a big SEP fund that did something very different. And $45.4 million was set aside for specific SEP programs. We put $7.1 million towards air filtration in schools. And those schools have to be in environmental justice communities in the Los Angeles area. We put $3 million towards air monitoring that will be split between the Porter Ranch area, which was the predominant victim of the SoCal gas blowout, but also part of that will go to an EJ community to fund air monitoring. We purchased electric breath mobiles for the Los Angeles area with $2 million. We purchased electric school buses for LAUSD. We put $3 million towards the electric school buses and their infrastructure. We're funding a health study on the impacts of exposure to natural gas. Now, while that is focused on the Porter Ranch area, because that's where the blowout is, we're hopeful that that will give us some important information generally about exposure to natural gas, which is not limited to that area, as we all know. There's exposure throughout the LA basin. We also did lead-based paint abatement through that SEP program, and $5.2 million was put towards the Boyle Heights, Maywood area in response to Exide, and that abatement is being run by the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. And we did set up a SEP fund that we hope will be funded by money returned by the mitigation or any monies unused by these other SEP programs. If they're unable to use all the money, the idea is that money will come back to the SEP fund, and that we will then be able to issue grants for SEPs that address air pollution, air toxins in the entire South Coast Basin. That's an unusual program, and one that my office, or at least my unit, is not really designed to do frequently, but it was such an unusual case that we thought it essential to try to get some of that SEP funding into environmental justice communities and to do something really different with it.
Thank you, Jessica. That's really interesting. So we're going to move on to the next speaker, and then we'll come back with questions for everybody. The next panelists to answer the question will be Russ Colby and Bobby Valencia at the Los Angeles Regional Water Control Board, Quality Control Board. So the question to you both is, how does your SEP program work, and how do you use it?
Hi, thanks, Todd. Again, my name is Russ Colby with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and today I'm joined with Bobby Valencia, who is an environmental scientist, one of my colleagues. I have a few slides, if you'll indulge me. I'd like to go through those. Again, I manage the compliance and enforcement section at the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. Supplemental Environmental Projects, or SEPs, are environmentally beneficial projects that a settling party agrees to undertake in the settlement of an action to offset a portion of a civil liability. The State Water Board supports the inclusion of SEPs in the settlement of an enforcement action, so long as these projects meet the criteria specified in the State Water Board's SEP policy. SEPs are an important component of the Water Board's enforcement program and can help further the Water Board's mission. Next slide, please. So the Water Boards have identified 6 specific categories of projects which may qualify as SEPs. Many SEPs may fall into one or more of these categories as shown on the slide. The policy also establishes a 7th category for other projects that meet all the requirements of this policy, but do not fit into one of the specific categories. So the main requirement for qualifying for a SEP in any category is that it shall directly benefit groundwater, surface water, or drinking water quality or quantity, and the beneficial uses of waters of the state. Entities may apply to have a SEP placed on our list and can do so through our website or through the Rose Foundation's solicitation process. Next slide, please. The Public Resources Code requires each board, department, or office within Cal EPA to establish a policy of SEPs that benefit disadvantaged communities, or DACs. The SEP policy for DACs include all the criteria shown on the slide. Specific to number 2 here, generally the SEP policy limits the value of a SEP to 50% of the total monetary liability. However, the SEP policy also creates an exception where the value of a SEP may exceed the 50% limit for SEPs located in or benefiting a DAC, an environmental justice community, a community that has a financial hardship, or where the SEP substantially furthers the human right to water. This has allowed the regional board to allocate up to 100% of the liability to fund a SEP. In 2018, the regional board partnered with the Rose Foundation for Communities and the Environment to help meet this requirement. Now, I'm not going to steal any Tim's thunder here, as he will speak about the Rose Foundation later, but we chose to partner with the Rose Foundation because of their success with other regional boards and are seeing the same success in our region. And our last slide, just contacts. Feel free to contact us with any questions you may have about our SEP program, as well as our public participation efforts. I've also included a link to a page on our website that includes details on our SEP program, and also has a list of currently available SEPs. And I think we'll put that link in the chat as well.
Thank you, Russ. All right. The next person on our panel to answer the question will be Warren Hawkins at the Air Resources Board. So Warren, how does CARB's SEP program work, and how do we use it?
Thank you, Dodd, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to talk. Our program is, and Linda highlighted some of the things earlier in an earlier presentation, but our program, you can start by going to one of 2 places. You can contact the Supplemental Environmental Projects team directly, or you can go to the Cal EPA Supplemental Environmental Projects page where there'll be a link. Either of those 2 will put you in contact with the SEP team, and they will help you through the process of completing a project scope and timeline, and for better or worse word, proposal application. Once we've gone through that process and the team has vetted it, it goes up to our executive office for approval. Once it's approved, it goes on an eligibility list, which Cal EPA maintains, as well as we do internally. From there, once it's approved, our enforcement staff that do case investigations identify violations from a party, go into negotiations, and up to 50% of the settlement negotiations may be able to go to fund a supplemental environmental project. With those lists, we provide the violator an opportunity to choose the projects based on nexus to the violation and amount of the settlement, nexus being pollutant and or location. Once a project's been funded, then the settlement agreement with the violator reflects that. The supplemental environmental team develops a SEP agreement that will go to you as the project implementer. In that, there's guidance on requirements of the program. The implementer will sign that, CARB will sign it, and then that becomes a binding contract. Once that's executed, then the money from the violator goes directly to the SEP implementer to implement the program, and then it becomes the responsibility of the SEP implementer to report as required, as well as execute what the SEP proposal said with the money they received. And kind of some of the projects that we've done in the past, since 2017, since we revamped the program and started out, didn't start over, but we transitioned into the current phase that we're in. We've funded roughly 55 projects for north of $25 million. And those projects are expanding greatly. In this coming season, you'll see when we report out next year that our numbers are substantially higher. Many of the projects that we fund include education projects. Linda touched on a couple of those earlier in schools. We fund tree greening projects to see the efficacy of trees removing particulate matter from the air. We have asthma education programs and prevention programs that we've funded. We've funded school filtration projects throughout the state. We've also got projects that focus on indoor air pollution removal. There's a whole no idling sign project is another one that we've taken on in the past, so we can reduce truck idling and compliance in neighborhoods or in near sensitive receptors. So those are kind of some of the things and the nuts and bolts. So please, there's contact information if you have any further questions about the Supplemental Environmental Projects program that we administer. Reach out to us, and we'd love to help you through the process. Thanks.
Thank you, Warren. And just to note, at the very end of this presentation after panel 4, there are 2 slides that provide contact information. One slide will provide contact information for each person that's been speaking today with regard to their SEP program, and the other will provide links to websites for each of the programs. So for those of you who are, when that's being mentioned, it's going to be displayed for you towards the end of the presentation today. Our next speaker is Mary Reichert at South Coast AQMD. So Mary, how does your SEP program work and how is it used at the AQMD?
Hi, thank you all. So our SEP program has been typically set up in the traditional manner, as some people had mentioned today. But I've been very interested to hear about the various ways that community projects and community organizations are being funded. We've had a few experiences with direct to the organization funding. We did a native restoration project and a few others. Our main SEP implementation program that we've had involves replacement of school buses. And so funds will be filtered to us that are being used as SEPs from throughout various organizations throughout the state. And then we will help administer the school bus replacement program. So they're replacing, dirtier diesel school buses with cleaner technologies to help obviously reduce the air pollution in the communities, and that both, the entire community is exposed to, and especially our children. So in terms of having these programs set up and available for applications, we don't have a formal process like that, but I'm actually hoping to learn more about that and see what we can implement at the South Coast as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay. Our next speaker is Karen Cotting at Los Angeles County Fire. So Karen, how does your SEP program work and how do you use it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate being added to this symposium because I've already learned a lot, honestly, from just from the prep meetings and understanding the Rose Foundation and the California EJ Small Grants Program. I was not even aware of that. Just some brief background on LA County Fire. So we are the CUPA for the county, and so Certified Unified Program Agency, and we implement the hazardous waste program, the annual hazmat business plan reporting requirements, the California Accidental Release Prevention Program, which is the high risk sites in LA County, which there's 178, which are like the refineries, the Above Ground Petroleum Storage Act program, and the Underground Storage Act program. So that makes up our CUPA. And we currently have about 25,000 businesses permitted in LA County that we regulate. And we have a staff of 90 hazmat specialists. We are the largest CUPA in the state of California, and we are the only one that has a dedicated enforcement unit to investigate environmental crimes. In the last year, we did 53 formal enforcement actions. 50 of those were what are called administrative enforcement orders. And then 3 were referrals to either the city attorney or the district attorney. So what typically happens is hazardous waste violations carry the highest penalty. So every time we cite a violation that's considered a class 1 violation, we're required to take formal enforcement action. Typically, we have found, the fast way to bring a business into compliance and to penalize them also is to do these administrative enforcement orders. So when the business comes in and we do a settlement conference with them and present them with the penalty, occasionally the company will actually ask, do you do any SEPs? And in the last 5 years, we've actually done 26 SEPs, and they've all been related, for the most part, for training for our staff. So with 90 technical staff, we send a big slug of our staff to the annual Coupa conference, and there's also an enforcement conference. And so we actually fund scholarships for our staff and also for other agency staff. So that's historically what we've done with those 26 SEPs. And then the other thing we've done is we've funded the LA County Sanitation Lab is the one that runs our hazardous waste samples when we do sampling for hazardous waste. And so to run those analysis, we actually fund an account to pay for that. I'd say typically our SEP amounts are up to 50% of whatever our penalty would be. And they're usually in the $5,000 to $20,000 range. As far as, and a lot of larger companies actually want SEPs. They actually, I think they're more familiar with the process. And so they're the ones that usually bring it up. But in the course of being invited to this presentation today, I'm really interested in maybe funding some of the Cal EPA, EJ small grants, but I'm really interested in actually trying to, if we can fund some monies to some local organizations, maybe like the Rose Foundation or something that can manage these grants locally. We wouldn't have the ability just from a labor standpoint to like manage the grants ourselves, but we would definitely be interested in funding another agency's or like a grant manager or something. So that's very appealing to us. So that's kind of LA County in a nutshell, but thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Karen. That was really interesting. I was curious as to how the Coupas do it because it's very different from how we do it.
Yeah.
So that was helpful. Thank you. So our last speaker on the panel is going to be Joel Jones at US EPA Region 9, who's going to tell us about US EPA's SEP program that they are restarting.
Correct. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, everyone. This panel has been, as others have said, very both encouraging and enlightening for me as well. Again, my name is Joel Jones. I'm the Deputy Director for Enforcement here in Region 9. And the first thing I wanted to just emphasize, and Todd alluded to this, if we had this call maybe a month and a half ago, the answer would have been, we don't do SEPs at EPA. So that just gives you the juxtaposition of how different our circumstances are compared to the state. The previous administration, before the Biden administration came in, had essentially ruled out doing any supplemental environmental projects because the funds obviously go to a third party and not to the federal treasury, which is one view of an ancient law, 1800s statute that required all funds to come back to the treasury, was the one that they were leaning on. So just as recently as a month ago, the Department of Justice issued new guidelines to reduce those limitations for these payments to non-governmental third parties, which is what would be a SEP, and reaffirmed our ability as a federal agencies to use SEPs in appropriate circumstances to address environmental harms for defendants who violated environmental laws. So I wanted to start with that, kind of precursor, because it's not something we haven't done in the past. Up until 2020, we were doing this regularly, and I think Mary Reichert mentioned that the program at South Coast, AQMD, a couple of our SEPs were actually we funded their program that is already well established to do school air filtration systems. And so our SEPs aren't a program per se, but when we have a defendant who's interested in improving their image or doing the right thing, or keeping those funds within the community, we then route them toward a third party to work with. We aren't in the direct responsibility, direct engagement with that process. It's fairly complicated, and the legal issues require us to kind of stay out of what the entity decides to do, but we definitely guide them toward potential options that we think would be useful. So next slide is just one more slide that gets to the larger point with our agency. Because of the political change in Washington, we're seeing the recognition by this administration to pursue supplemental environmental projects when possible, because it can potentially address direct harm in the community and keep those funds local and not send them back to the Treasury. We're trying to strengthen our engagement with communities and community groups to get a sense of what are the types of things that would be the best use of funds potentially in those communities, and where are those opportunities that we can direct a defendant toward achieving a greater improvement for their actions. And then the last thing I just want to mention is, because there are limits on the program, it kind of depends on what's referred to previously as the nexus. And so we've done I mentioned the Clean Air Act settlement with the truck and bus rules of California. Those were directly addressing harm caused by trucks in and around Los Angeles. Under RCRA and under 112R, the Emergency Response Program, we've done SEPs with the defendants to provide hazardous waste equipment, kind of very expensive equipment that some counties and local jurisdictions have a hard time funding. Entities have been willing to fund those kinds of projects historically, and that's something that we can kind of help them and direct them toward doing. But it is a challenge, because if in the case of your community group, you'd like to do something that's education or outreach, if the violations don't line up directly with that, we aren't able to direct the defendant toward that potential option. So it becomes a matter of finding at least a fairly direct, or if not an indirect connection between the kinds of violations that they've caused, the harm that they've caused, and a remedy that resolves it. So it's a limited pool, I think, compared to the funds available at the state level. But the opportunities do exist for some of our larger cases. And I mentioned Department of Justice, because those are usually the cases that have larger settlement amounts in the millions, and we're able to direct larger amounts towards the community in those cases. But fortunately, as I mentioned to begin, now that we have kind of re-engaged on SEPs, I would say the cases that will come out next year will be opportunities for us to pursue SEPs that we previously haven't done for the last about 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. And thank you to all the panels for answering the first question. One question I have for the whole panel, something I was wondering is, with these projects, so who proposes, who chooses the projects, and how does that process work in each of your programs? Does that, I guess the follow-up to that would be, does that create any issues with regards to the types of projects that realistically can or can't be funding based on how those choices are made? And feel free to jump in.
Hi, this is Warren. I'll go ahead and jump in. Just clarification on the question. Who chooses projects as far as once a violation has occurred and projects that get funded, or who chooses projects to go into the pipeline at the...
Well, I guess you could talk about both. So first, how do projects get into the pipeline? And second, who makes a decision on what gets funded in a SEP project related to a environmental violations program?
Okay, perfect. So the projects that enter our program are proposed by the community-based organizations or air districts, for the most part, that want to have a project funded. So they come to us with a project proposal, and then our team helps them flesh out the project proposal and fill out the appropriate forms to get it approved to be listed for funding. After that, once we have a violation, we provide to the investigator a list of projects that meet the nexus. So it'd be a pollutant or location nexus typically. And within the state, most of our rules that we enforce in the enforcement division are statewide mobile source rules. So our nexus is fairly broad. So we're able to fund a number of projects through that process. But ultimately the violator, it's a voluntary program. The Supplemental Environmental Program is, so they have the option to participate in whether or not they want to fund a SEP, and then they also do have the ability to pick the SEPs to be funded from what we provide them.
I can talk a little bit about the water boards. Just like Warren was talking about, it is a voluntary program. When we issue an administrative civil liability, the discharger has the option to fund a SEP. We cannot compel them to choose a SEP. And we have three paths a discharger can choose. One is they can come up with their own supplemental environmental project and submit that to us as part of a settlement. And we review the project, make sure it has appropriate milestones and so on. Two, we have an active list on our website where anyone can suggest a supplemental environmental project to be chosen by a discharger. We have a form online that someone can fill out, and just the basic structure of their proposal. And then third is that partnering with the Rose Foundation to get more of those grassroots communities involved in soliciting supplemental environmental projects.
I'll jump in here. So to follow along with, it's a voluntary program. One of the things that we do in our enforcement actions is we look at SEPs as in lieu of penalties. And so to encourage participation in putting money towards a SEP for the defendants, we don't reduce the penalty amount, right? This is the amount of penalties you're going to pay. You can pay it all in penalties. It can all go to where the penalties go, which is defined by particular laws, or you can put up to a certain amount in lieu of penalties towards these programs. We generally either choose them ourselves or give them a selection of pre-chosen SEPs that the prosecutors have approved of. I can't imagine a world, and certainly I haven't approved one where the defendants choose their own SEP, create it, and we approve it. It is always going to be what we call prosecutor SEP, meaning we've chosen it and identified that it's a valid program where we can send that money to.
Others on the panel who want to respond to that question? Okay, thank you. I guess the next question I would ask is, we've heard a little bit about this concept of nexus. I think Joel brought it up and also Warren talked about it. So why does nexus matter? And how is it considered by your agency in the context of which projects are eligible for funding for a particular violation that you're resolving?
Since I mentioned it, I'll
Go ahead, Joel.
I'll go ahead and explain. And it's usually our attorneys that make that recommendation. So we just follow their lead essentially. But it gets back to that larger point that there's a lot of scrutiny on at least federally, for the use of funds for things that might be perceived as EPA directing, otherwise directing resources that Congress did not approve and or direct us to do so. And so the requirements for us are very strict that the funds have to be used per either the appropriations language for our agency, or in the case of a settlement agreement, that it's clearly addressing the harm caused by the defendants, and not just something that EPA thinks in our eminent wisdom is the right thing to do. And so that's why nexus becomes very important, and it has to be a fairly direct relationship. In the case of I think with CARB, we have an easier nexus because mobile sources of air pollution are throughout the region, and so it doesn't have to be an enforcement action that addresses, say, a truck that came in through Lake Tahoe as opposed to through Los Angeles. It's all throughout the greater Southland Basin. We might be addressing in terms of addressing the source, which is usually air pollution from mobile sources.
Todd, I'd like to add too that nexus is important because the intent is to get the funding from the violation into the neighborhoods where the violation occurred. So in those situations where we have a nexus, that project would be put forth for selection to the violator, prior. So in Joel's example, let's say he came in through Southern California and exited through Tahoe, and we found the violation in LA, then, that truck, we could potentially, the projects immediate to where the violation occurred could be presented for funding versus a project in Northern California.
So for the city attorney's office, you know, the more local you get, the less rigid you get, and the more flexible I think your world becomes. And so for us, we have a little bit more flexibility on Nexus than some of our statewide or federal agencies, but Nexus is still very important, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to take a SEP that for an injury in the city of Los Angeles and fund remediation in Northern California. And so we do tend to focus on locality as much as we can. The other way to look at Nexus is if it's an air pollution case, then we try to fund air pollution. If it's a water pollution case, you try to target it towards water. But there's a little bit more flexibility there. And I think traditionally for my office, if it hasn't been towards enhancing and improving enforcement generally, then the bigger part of the nexus for us would be the greater Los Angeles area, because just the city of LA can get really challenging. If any of you've ever looked at a map of the city, it's an interesting one. So we tend to focus on the greater LA area as our main nexus point.
Anybody else want to take that? Okay, next question. So what are ideas? Have you thought, how are you working to increase outreach to to grassroots organizations to be able to get more applications for these funds? So like, what are the types of things you've done to try to increase getting people on the list, getting projects listed, finding projects that have a nexus to the type of violation? How does that work for your agencies?
I'll start. So the SEP policy, as part of the capacity building for our organization, it includes an outreach-based approach to soliciting SEPs. And that's when we started to, we had that discharger can initiate a SEP of their own SEP, and we had this list, but we really didn't have a way to get down into the communities and have them solicit SEPs. So that's when we approached the Rose Foundation. And we keep mentioning the Rose Foundation, but I promise you're going to hear more about them coming up. But that's the way that we have really expanded our outreach into those communities. And we're starting to see some success in that area.
How does outreach work for some of the other agencies? Thank you, Russ.
Todd, hi, this is Warren. Venues like this are an outstanding opportunity for all of us to talk about our programs and give the information to folks who have may not heard about us directly. We also do have, through our Assembly Bill 617 communities, we're actively involved in those communities, and we attend all the meetings. So when we have opportunities to speak on the SEP program and its abilities to help fund projects in neighborhoods, then we do so as well. We also have built some good, strong connections with other local-based communities that some are in participation here that we work directly with, and they help us spread the word as well. We've done cross-board presentations in the past to tribal communities or to other environmental justice symposiums and work groups. So there's multiple ways we get the word out, plus our webpage, and then discussions with air districts as well, so they know what we're doing.
I guess a related question though. So for the Cal EPA boards and departments, all of those projects eventually that are approved, get put on a centralized list, right? Is that list available to the public?
Yes.
So that like other non-BDOs could potentially look and use that list?
It should be listed on the Cal EPA webpage.
Okay. Do you on this panel, do you all think there are maybe some opportunities to work together to coordinate on outreach to community groups?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that I say about these panels every time I participate is that I meet somebody new, I make a new connection, and things change in the way we run things in our office. And from preparation for this panel, I've already been put in touch with the Rose Foundation, which again, you guys are hearing a lot about them. It's almost like a promotional video for them. But we've been put in touch with them, and we're working on some new ideas about how to focus more on our local community. I think that to be fair as well, I think the small grants, Cali Pay Small Grants Fund, is exciting to see that growing, and I think there's some new connections and opportunities there. So yeah, these are great opportunities for us to start thinking and growing, and it brings not just the community and government together, but for those of you in the community, these panels do a lot to bring government together as well. And we really make a lot of good connections by participating in these.
Thank you, Jessica. So I guess so any more responses to the previous question? Looks like no. Okay. I guess I'd want to sort of flip the coin a little bit. So once there's a decision made to provide funding to a group, what are the expectations on the part of either the government or the defendant relative to the organization that's receiving the money, and how does that work?
I can mention on that for us, because that does become about the accountability of the funds being used as expected. In our TSCA program, we had for lead-based paint compliance, we had a proposal for a community group to go out and do blood lead level sampling or testing for kids in that community. So it's crucial that we have a documented report from them that summarized their efforts, so that we can then share if in fact we were ever asked for facts on the status of that case from either the IG or any kind of audit. And so in any case where there's an outcome with a substantial amount of funds going to a third party, we would have to have essentially a description and summary of those results. In the case of the air filtration system, it's fairly straightforward. You can see the physical purchase of the system, as well as the emergency response equipment. But even that, we have to have documented receipts for all those things, just to confirm that the funds were used in accordance with the SEP.
For the water boards, a lot of the work goes into the SEP proposal once we get to the settlement part, and Bobby can jump in at any time if I miss anything. But like I said, a lot of effort and energy goes into those projects. It contains full description of the SEP, milestones that need to be met, and an associated budget that goes along with those milestones. Once that's completed, it is subject to a third-party audit and final reports of the SEP completion. And the role that we have is, if it comes down to a portion of that SEP has been completed, the liability remains with the discharger through the duration of the Supplemental Environmental Project. So if the entire SEP isn't completed, or a portion of that SEP isn't completed, then those monies revert back to the fund at the state board.
And with their resources board SEP program, once the violator has chosen to fund a SEP and CARB's team takes it over, we enter into an agreement directly with the SEP recipient themselves. So the performance of their project is their responsibility. And as far as the violator goes, once they pen and execute the settlement agreement and they complete the payment to the recipient of that the money of that project, then the violator is released of liability of overseeing that project. And it becomes our responsibility with the recipient to make sure that it's done correctly and finished.
So I think that's a really interesting point for the CARB program, Warren. So we actually we transfer liability from the defendant to the recipient with regards to the recipient finishing the project through a contract?
Correct. So part of the process is 2 sets of documents are developed during the process. One, the violator gets a settlement agreement with the stipulations of the case, what's required of them. And if they agree to a SEP or funding a SEP, then there's a provision in that settlement agreement that directs them to pay the SEP recipient. The SEP recipient themselves executes an agreement or a contract, for better or worse words, with us and our executive officer or their designated authority to sign. And that becomes the contract between them and us. So if there's failure to perform the SEP, like the project, they misspend the money or improper reporting or other things, we do have the ability to, within that SEP agreement, to potentially claw back funds directly from the SEP recipient, not from the violator, and or hold the SEP recipient accountable for the potential of future funding from this project, from the current project that they're receiving funding from, or any from future funding from other projects. So those are some of the provisions that we have in there to make sure that projects move along as they're supposed to.
And then just to follow up on CARB a little more. So we were audited a few years ago. As a result of that, we increased the reporting requirements, Warren, onto our recipients. So how often are reports required of recipients in the CARB program? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I took a sip of my water and I didn't want everybody to hear. Quarterly, we have the requirements for the reporting, our quarterly reports for the duration of the project, and then a final report with a high-level summary of what was accomplished and what was learned, and things that we can improve on and they can improve on. Throughout the entire process, though, I want to point out that their recipients aren't on an island as far as reporting goes. So if there's any questions, clarifications, help, templates, whatever, the team for the community outreach team who runs the Supplemental Environmental Projects program, we're here to help. We want to make sure that recipients have the tools that they need and the ability to be successful in the implementation of their projects.
Thank you. So for the whole panel, as you've implemented the SEP program, what kind of challenges have you faced?
For the city attorney's office, our biggest challenge is, like I've said, that we don't have the capacity to be a grant manager. And so we're looking for other funds. And when talking about Nexus, I mentioned that it's important for us to try to make sure the money's coming back to at least the LA area. And it's hard for us to get those assurances out of some of the pre-existing funds. And so I think that becomes a real challenge for us in terms of choosing where we're going to put that SEP money. And to be frank, it means that a lot of times it just goes to a pre-established fund, one that's established either in the Fish and Game Code or in the Penal Code, because those are safe in terms of ensuring government money is going to an account that is going to oversee it properly. But we are always looking for opportunities and ways to diversify and get that money directly into the Los Angeles area, and specifically into EJ communities. There's a real focus on trying to get to the worst impacts in LA and the worst harms and the most egregious ones and fixing those. But our biggest challenge is directing it there with an overseer who can ensure that and will accept the money with those limitations on it. One thing that happens, I don't think that we've talked about yet, is that the SEP recipient, so the fund that's getting the money, can reject it. They can say, no, we don't want that. And so certain funds won't accept money if we put the limitation on it that it has to come to the city. Because for us, these are court orders. And so whoever accepts the money has to follow that court order. And if they can't follow it, they won't accept it. And so that becomes a big hurdle for us in getting money back to the Los Angeles area.
You raise a really interesting point, Jessica. Sorry to break in here, but when you're saying that essentially one of the reasons, what I hear you saying is that one of the reasons why you don't necessarily provide money to the Cali PA Small Grants Program, for example, is that they can't assure that the nexus is actually met with any individual project that's funded.
Right.
I wonder if there's a way to turn that around so that one of the things like we're trying to do within our own agency at CARB is to try to build linkages between our grants program and our SEP program. And I think Warren and Linda mentioned this a little bit. Maybe I think Natalie did actually, that what we're trying to do is for projects that aren't funded by the grants, we're actually trying to put them onto the SEP list. And then if they do, they're available publicly. And so rather than sending money to a grants program, you could pick potentially projects off a list that originally came in from a grants program.
That would be fantastic. We have found that challenging to do in the past. So one of the funds that we supported through the SoCal gas litigation was the air monitoring in schools. And I'm sure Mary can talk about, there's a number of programs at AQMD that fund those. We ultimately had to create a whole new account there to put the money into to ensure that it would comply with the court order. And that's where the hurdle comes in, right? Is that we think, okay, we just want to put in a fund that exists at AQMD, just make sure that it goes to EJ communities. But our court order had so many limitations on where that money could be spent and in what community it could go into, that AQMD had to establish a whole new fund for us. And they did, and they've been wonderful and are wonderful to work with, but we had to create a whole new fund. And so I think the fund, when it gets created, has to have the capacity to accept that limitation.
Okay, that's helpful. So Russ, I'm sorry to have interrupted you.
Oh, that's okay. I could talk about a couple. We've funded about 13 SEPs totaling over $4.2 million. But the issue is over half of those are $300,000 SEPs. There are quite a few civil liabilities that are $10,000 or less. And you start looking at, are there projects that are small enough or that can be, transitioned into a smaller package to be able to take those SEPs. Right now, we don't have the ability to pool all these smaller funds in order to perform a larger SEP. I think that's one issue we have right now. And then two is, and I'm jealous of the Air Board, is the liability issue. Again, this is a voluntary on the discharger for the water boards. And, the holding on to that liability through the completion of the SEP is a challenge.
Go ahead, Warren.
Russ, that's a good point, because when we started this process years ago, that was we found it difficult for violators to accept and want to take the responsibility to be responsible for the completion of the SEP. So I don't remember how long it's been, Todd, you might be able to remember, but 4 or 5 years ago is when we came up with a new process to not hold the violator accountable for that project, unless probably one it was they're implementing, but we haven't run across that yet. But for, hold the recipients responsible.
As we were developing the new SEP policy back, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, one of the things we heard from community groups, including in the Southern California area especially, was that it was potentially problematic to have a grassroots organization in contract with essentially in a contract with a defendant in a case. The part of the issue was that the interests of the industry organization that was subject to the violation and the grassroots organization were very different, which created several problems. One, there's not necessarily a desire on the industry's part to fund some of these grassroots projects because sometimes they conflict. And also you did not want a way for the industry to be able to hold the recipient for lack of a better word, hostage if they didn't like the results of the project. So the liability issue was something that we spent a lot of time working through with our legal department for those reasons based on the public comments we received. So with that, maybe let's take some questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please type it into the chat or raise your hand now and we'll go through it. So there was a question from Maria Solomon. Is making the SEP recipient responsible or liable done via policy? It's kind of a legal question, so.
I think you kind of just addressed it, Todd, to some degree. That it's a determination that was made by our legal department. So if that falls into policy or requirement, I don't know how to answer that, but
I guess I'll take it from our perspective. We worked it through with our legal office. It was something that we determined that we could do, but that decision is going to be specific to each agency's legal department, which may, different departments may come up with very different reads of the situation. And, each department is going to have their own issues they're trying to deal with. So what works for us may not work for everybody, but it was a solution that worked for us and was pretty beneficial in helping to expand the program at CARB. Other thoughts on that question? Okay. Are there other questions for the panel? Any more questions in the chat? I think we got to them all. Let's see. So we talked about reporting back. We pointed to the website. So a couple of new questions just came in. So one is from Ken Zutu at the Citizen Error Monitoring Network. Hi, Ken. How many proposals are in the pipeline and what is available funding? What is the expected wait? Actually, Ken, you raised a really good question. So when I guess this is a question for the whole panel, when a recipient gets a project listed, what is the time frame for getting funded if there is one?
that's a hard one to answer because there is like you said, not an exact time frame. We don't have ongoing allocations of funds every year where we say we have 10 million this year to spend and we can select projects and fund off of a list that way. Our funding comes in based on violations and the work that our enforcement team does. So the money that's available is directly related to number of violations our teams find. That varies from year to year. We've been pretty steady since 2017 of funding approximately $6 million or slightly higher annually. That stayed fairly consistent, and I would expect it would stay fairly consistent to that as well. But timeline how projects can be there with COVID that happened and the program kicking up, there were projects that were on an eligible list for a couple of years. Fortunately, many of those have been funded recently. So the timelines can wait from almost immediate to 18 months, I guess, maybe, depending on just really what's going on.
Other folks on the panel?
Warren's exactly right. The funds that go to SEPs are directly from administrative civil liabilities that are issued by the regional board. So we try to make it clear to any SEP proponents ahead of time that there's no guarantee that you'll get it soon or, possibly even fund it all. It's just, you've heard about Nexus. It's got to be in the right place. The violation has to be in the right place to meet that nexus for a SEP proponent. the funds, the amount of funds has to also be in the ballpark, right? There's a question in the chat now about project flexibility. One of the learning curves that we went through with the Rose Foundation in the first year was, we had a list. We currently have about 21 projects on the Rose Foundation list that are available for SEP funding. And what we learned after the first year was, Tim went back to the SEP proponents and said, okay, you had this set amount to begin with. This time around, can you make your projects scalable so that if your project is $200,000 and funding comes in for 100,000, can you scale that project down to meet that 100,000? And we're seeing success with those projects being scalable. So I think that's the big takeaway that we had from that first year was that the proponents being able to have a range that they could accept to get their project completed.
And I'll say for EPA, just because it gets to the larger question in terms of how these are administered. With a grant program, traditionally you would have a list of priority projects in a queue and you pick them off one at a time. And then that's not the way it would work for us with SEPs. It's more of a menu of options. So anything we can come up with that we hear about, we'll share that with the defendant, and they then make kind of the selection of what fits their needs as well. So it's a two-way street, and the amount of money, as just was mentioned, is very much dependent on the cases that may or may not be happening. So it's not a steady stream. It's one of those more opportunistic funding opportunities.
So I think what I'm hearing is that, once a recipient gets on a list, there's no guarantee of funding. There's no certainty when the project will be funded, but there is a lot of money available. So a lot of projects do get funded depending on the agency. 4 million in projects at the LA Water Board, 25 million at CARB. That's not chump change, but it doesn't mean that every project will get funded or that every project would get funded in a timely manner. In that vein, can you all talk about, so what does that mean for a recipient? If a recipient submits a project 18 months prior to funding, then the project gets funded. How does that work if the situation on the ground for the recipient is changed? Is there any type of flexibilities on deliverable or timeline?
Todd, I'll go ahead and jump in. I'm going to say yes. We have learning through the process, and I think COVID was really probably a good trial run for all of us because it presented challenges to timelines and budgets and things of that nature. So we work directly with the recipients, not just during the project proposal and approval phase, but also once it gets selected, the team is here also to discuss and learn from the community-based organization or the implementer of that SEP. One of the things that we do is if it has been sitting there for quite some time, and you mentioned 18 months, let's say for that example, we would reach out to the SEP recipient and ask the question, really, does what you proposed 18 months ago still work for this pot of funding? And if the answer is yes, then we can move forward. If the answer is no, then we might make some adjustments to budgets or timelines or things of that nature, so long as it's not a completely different project and it still falls into the original scope of the project. We have the ability to work with them to adjust some of those deliverables in the project.
It's the same for the water board. It's communication. If something has been sitting on the list, and we try to update our list on a semi-regular basis so that people have the opportunity to update their projects as needed. If it has been sitting there for almost a year, we will, and a discharger chooses that supplemental environmental project, we will reach out to the proponent to make sure that they're still able to perform that project within the time frame.
Other thoughts on that question? I guess a related question. So Cynthia had posted in the chat, can an EJ roundtable be convened by a collaboration of agency efforts so groups can learn from each other and get direct agency guidance? Some of us do not know the options we can choose from or what's on the menu. So, I mean, does that sound like something that agencies might be willing to participate in to get more? I'd say it sounds like there's almost two aspects of that. One is agency coordination on, sort of, for lack of a better term, like best practices for how to run these types of programs. Or then there's the other side of joining on outreach with local community groups to try to build more interest and fundable projects.
I was going to use the thumb up emoji, but I would say, yeah, we'd have interest, Todd.
Other folks?
It sounds like a great idea. I mean, I think the more that we can all communicate with the community about what's available and have the community educate us as the folks trying to direct those resources, it's a great idea.
And the water board would be happy to participate in something like that as well.
Thank you. Cynthia asked, can the LAEJ network write a SEP for the EJ roundtable? And I think that's a possibility, Cynthia. We could definitely talk about that. I see Ambreen Alshan has her hand up. Ambreen, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm not sure what is happening. It wasn't allowing me to unmute myself. So that might be the reason with Sophia earlier. Let me see, it's morning or afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Breen Afshan. I manage CARB's Office of Environmental Justice and Border Relations. I was listening to this conversation because we have a vested interest in terms of our program, community air grants. They come under the portfolio of programs I manage. While we are talking about SEPs, and that is a very important piece of the puzzle, I wanted to remind the audience as well as the participants and the panels that where there are no certainty as it relates to SEP in terms of amount, when and where. For example, the programs such as EJ Small Grants, which Vanessa talked about, and Community Air Grants, we do have some certainty in terms of how much money will be available, what it is available for, what kind of projects, and we release a draft solicitation. So I want to do a plug in here for the program that we have $10 million available for this round of funding, which we are currently working on our solicitation, which we will be releasing soon as a draft, and will be asking and providing response, first of all, asking for input and feedback from our community partners and other stakeholders. And then that will be the time for us to respond and provide any support we can. And I have also heard about technical assistance or providing support. That is one of our topic we are really, really passionate about, because we have heard from smaller community-based organizations that they don't have enough resources available even to apply for those grants. And so just to make the level playing field for everyone, we are hoping, because we have another $10 million available after this solicitation, which we will be start working right after this solicitation. The plan is to have some kind of a technical support or technical assistance available. And we are still in earlier discussions with to see what would make sense in terms of a third party or a neutral party to have those discussions. And one last point I would like to make, which we are really proud in terms of connecting the dots for our community partners. As in Community Air Grants, we work with Todd and team this year to make sure that because our program is competitive. And to give you a scale, last time we had $10 million available and we received funding for funding ask of $15 million. So we realized that when somebody or a applicant submits an application, they put a lot of time, energy, and resources. So we are thinking about giving a second chance or second life to that application. So again, as I said, we work with Todd and team to make sure that if the projects, they will not be funded under community air grants. They will automatically be put on the list to be considered for supplemental environmental projects or SEPs. We would be more than happy to have those kind of discussions with others to see how we can leverage those application packages and consider them for multiple opportunities. So our community partners who are already under-resourced, they don't have to apply multiple times for similar opportunities. And thank you very much, Todd, for giving me this opportunity to do the plug-in for our program and share information in terms of our upcoming solicitation.
Happy to. Thank you, Ambreen, for your comments. Okay. So are there any more questions from the audience? Okay. So any questions for the panel for each other? All right. So with that, let me start by thanking everyone on this panel. I really appreciate your participation today, and we'll be coming back to you in the fourth panel. So please stick around. So next slide, Helena. So I think what we're going to do next is take a 30-minute break. So let's reconvene at looks like 12:40. You know, being in Zoom meetings for multiple hours, those of us who do it all the time are got to take breaks. So let's take a 30-minute break. We'll reconvene at 12:40, and we will start our third panel, which is going to be with the other side of this, the recipient and the administrator side. So among others, we're going to hear from Tim Little and the Rose Foundation. We're also going to hear from several representatives of groups that have actually received funding from SEPs. So you'll get an understanding from the recipient side of how these programs work. So we'll look forward to that discussion in 30 minutes. So I'll see you all back here at 12:40. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Alrighty, it's 12:40. Is everyone back? If you are a panelist / organizer, can you give me a thumbs up? Awesome, thank you, Beth. And 10. Hi, Todd.
Howdy. So is everybody back on, Helena? Do we want to wait a few more minutes for people to join?
Yeah, I think we should wait a couple more minutes.
Okay, let's do that. I'm going to go off video and finish my lunch.
Go for it. Okay, it's 12:42, so maybe we can get started again.
Okay, let me grab my pen. All right, so welcome back, everyone, from the break. I hope you had a productive lunch. Mine was quick. So let's dive in. The next part of our program is focused on recipients of SEP funds and groups that serve as liaisons between, essentially between the governments and community recipients. We call these administrators. And those groups are also recipients of funds themselves. So in this panel, we are going to hear from Mona Cummings, Robina Sewell, Brian Sheridan, Ben Harris, and Tim Little. So I'll tell you a little bit about each of the panel members. Mona Neandro Cummings has served as the CEO of Tree Fresno since 2019. Since 1985, Tree Fresno has been transforming the central San Joaquin Valley with water-wise trees and increased greening space. In that time, with the help of the community, the organization has planted over 51,000 trees throughout Fresno, Madera, Kings, and Tulare counties. In 2014, Tree Fresno began receiving funding through CAL FIRE's Urban and Community Forestry Program, enabling the organization to work with cities, counties, schools, and others to plant more large canopy, drought-tolerant trees. In 2017, Tree Fresno and Sonoma Technology partnered on the Fresno Trees Supplemental Environmental Project through the California Air Resources Board, allowing for the building of vegetative barriers designed to reduce pollutant exposure to communities situated near busy roadways. As part of this SEP, Tree Fresno partnered with the Fresno Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce in 2021, running its first cohort of the Green Team Youth Ambassador Program, an 8-month education, outreach, and workforce development program connecting individuals from high-need Fresno neighborhoods to educational opportunities and tree-related careers. Founded by Robina Sewell in 1998, California Safe Schools is Children's Environmental Health and Environmental Justice is a Children's Environmental Health and Environmental Justice Coalition. CSS achieved national prominence by spearheading the Los Angeles Unified Integrated Pest Management Policy, the most stringent pesticide policy in the nation for kindergarten through 12th grade public schools, and the first to embrace the precautionary principle and the right to know. The success of the policy led to California's Healthy Schools Act. Today, the Unified IPM policy serves as an international model for school districts and communities. On October 6, 2005, then Governor Schwarzenegger signed AB 405, sponsored by California Safe Schools. The bill bans experimental pesticides whose health effects are unknown from California K through 12 public schools. As a result, more than 6 million California children and hundreds of thousands of school children are protected from experimental chemicals whose health effects are unknown. California Safe Schools continues to be a leader on children's environmental health with an emphasis on schools and environmental justice communities. Under Robina's leadership, CSS has facilitated changes at the policy level as well as at the grassroots while creating a lasting institutional protection. Its website is www.calisafe.org. Brian Sheridan is celebrating 20 years of leading nonprofit organizations' fundraising and communication efforts. In addition to his core fundraising responsibility, Brian leads the Coalition for Clean Air's California Clean Air Day efforts, which in 4 years has grown to an estimated 1.8 million participants across the state, thanks to the collective effort of 651 nonprofit, business, and government partners. Brian came to the Coalition for Clean Air from the Council for Watershed Health, where he founded the Environmental Funders and Media Forum and spearheaded the growth of outreach, funding, and events. Prior to this, he was a director of development for Heritage Square Museum. In this role, he oversaw the growth of the museum from a sleepy outpost to one of the Los Angeles' landmark historic destinations. Brian received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from UC San Diego. Benjamin Harris joined Los Angeles Waterkeeper in July 2021, where he serves as a staff attorney and focuses on litigation and advocacy work. Originally from Marin County, Harris obtained both his undergraduate and marine biology degree and his Juris Doctor from UCLA, and has been practicing as a California licensed attorney for almost 6 years. Prior to joining LA Waterkeeper, Harris spent 2 years as a fellow at the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the UCLA School of Law, including the opportunity as a co-teacher for the Environmental Law Clinic. After law school, he briefly worked as a litigator in private practice and clerked for the Honorable Stephen V. Wilson in the United States District Court for the Central District of California. Tim Little is the Rose Foundation's Chief Executive and Principal Grants Officer. Starting 30 years ago from an endowment of zero, he has built a family of environmental and consumer protection grant-making funds at the foundation, supported via an innovative legal settlement model and supervised by community-based advisory boards, that collectively award up to $8 million each year to build community capacity to advocate for conservation, justice, and equity. He has held leadership positions related to environmental health and conservation advocacy at organizations including Communities for a Better Environment, Coalition for Clean Air, and Heal the Bay. Helped lead the shareholder advocacy initiative, which led to the creation of the Headwaters Forest Reserve to protect some of Northern California's last ancient redwoods, and co-authored the influential environmental fiduciary series of publications related to the fiduciary responsibility of considering corporate environmental performance in managing long-term capital pools like pension funds and foundation endowments. So I would like to start with those of you who represent more grassroots groups that have received funding, Mona, Brian, and Robina. And so my first question to the panel is, how did you hear about the SEP program and what was the project that received funding? Let's start with Robina.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, all the attendees and speakers, and Todd, you're doing a wonderful job. My name is Rabina Sewell, and I'm the Executive Director of California Safe Schools. As Todd just shared with you, we're a Children's Environmental Health and Environmental Justice Coalition. And we first heard about the Supplemental Environmental Projects and Program during an environmental event. It was a very casual conversation. The year was like 2016. While talking to representatives from the Department of Toxic Substance Control and the California Air Resource Board. They explained to us that their agencies were in the process of reviewing potential supplemental environmental projects and explained the process and the protocols. And so we fairly quickly submitted several heartfelt projects that we had worked on during our 24 years of collaborating with very diverse communities. And we felt that these specific projects, when successfully completed, could easily be replicated. And those three processes were listening sessions with students throughout the Southern California area, several hundred students. Another was emission reductions that resulted in no idling, and ground truthing for environmental justice communities who wanted to identify facilities and then map them. So those were our three projects, and we have many more that we hope to submit in the future.
Thank you, Rubina. So let's go over to Brian.
Sure, and thank you for having me, Todd. You know, we got our first SEP award from CARB. Linda actually mentioned it at the beginning, which is the Kids Making Sense through Sonoma Technologies, who we'd worked with for many years. It's a great program. It basically educates middle and high school kids on utilizing air quality monitors through to do air quality experiments, and then we actually introduce them to policymakers so that they can present their finding. And it's a great program. We certainly had some interesting challenges that I can talk with. I know we've kind of got some things teed up. We also received a Clean Air Day SEP in July of this year, and that was great. It was for Clean Air Day. That one went really well, worked perfectly, and it fit into our plans and helped us to elevate that a lot. So I really appreciate it. There's two very big lessons learned. The original way we found out about the SEP program was through the contractor with Sonoma Technologies, who has an ongoing relationship and works with a lot of nonprofits throughout the state. And, then subsequently, we then decide to put in for our own project. So that's our projects.
Thank you. Mona?
Yes, our SEP was approved in about 2016-17, and it focuses on the building of vegetative barriers and air quality studies, sort of the before and after. How that impacts communities who are situated next to busy roadways. So I came on board about 3 years after the SEP had begun. It was funded through a partnership, or it was founded through a partnership also with Sonoma Technology because of their expertise in air quality measurement, and because of our Tree Fresno, our expertise at planting urban trees. So we actually have since then planted 5 or 6 of these vegetative barriers throughout the Fresno region. And we're in the process of sort of accumulating data just to sort of reflect how it looks kind of on the before and the after. So it's one of our most exciting projects. I think that people are very excited to hear about something a little bit more complex than just planting trees for urban greening. The Vegetative Barrier Project has a lot of scientific principles associated with it. I've learned during the process of being associated with it that, and from Sonoma Tech, that you don't want to build a vegetative barrier just anywhere. You know, the goal obviously is to improve air quality and not to make it worse. So we're very happy to be a part of this particular SEP, and it actually became the impetus for starting an outreach and education workforce development program last year that's focused on recruiting individuals from Southwest Fresno, which is one of the most polluted areas of Fresno. It's a partnership with the Fresno Metro Black Chamber of Commerce, where we offer an 8-month education about the value of urban trees and also connect that with tree-related jobs in the region. So we have speakers come in from everybody from PG&E, vegetation management, to CAL FIRE, to local nonprofits and EJ groups talking about various aspects of the care and maintenance, the planting and the value of urban trees, and how we can connect people in our communities that can benefit the most from more trees to jobs related to that.
Thank you. So question for the three of you on this panel, on this piece of the panel. What was the process like for development and getting your project listed? And were there any challenges or hurdles you had to overcome through the process? Any of you can jump in.
I'm happy to take that, Todd. You know, so it is interesting. So the process, I thought the process itself was very fair, right? You know, submit your proposal, initial review from the staff, you know, tweaks, you know, here and there. I think we had some big lessons learned, though, that might be unique. You know, look, I think everybody's living in this COVID world, which has certainly challenged us in many of the things that we do. But you know, as I look back at how we submitted our proposal, so what happened is that because of COVID, and nothing you can do about that, you know, we had some very prescriptive things that we had put in with the proposal to say that we will work with teacher X, Y, and Z. And, you know, when the world changed and teacher X, Y, and Z we had relationships with, you know, that meant that everything got kind of thrown out of whack because the proposals tied very clearly to all of these schools. So what became like a 1 or 2, you know, 1-year program has been now stretched out to over 3 years. And so, you know, going back and thinking about, and that stands in contrast to the awarded Clean Air Day proposal, which was in July of 2021, which had enough specificity in it to say to the funder, I can wrap my hands around this. This is very interesting, but enough flexibility that we could put it in different places. And so we knew exactly what to do when you know, July 2021, and then, you know, spent it down within, you know, 5 months. And so the lesson that I sort of learned from that is, you know, how you sort of, given the uniqueness of the SEP program, you know, given that it can be awarded anytime, you know, just be ready for that award will come, and kind of find that balance between, you know, making it specific so that somebody can appreciate it, but flexible enough so that, you know, you don't have to go through a renegotiation process. But I do also want to say, in every case, was very appreciated.
Our SEP proposals, Todd, included, well, they were developed over 24 years of our advocacy and collaboration, and we created these extensive lists and projects and programs, but they had very strong broad-based community support, but required funding to proceed. And why we very quickly understood that the selection process may not be ideal for time-sensitive projects. We were really grateful for the CARB and DTSC staff who assisted us in moving things forward and clarifying issues in a time-sensitive way, so that we were able to submit projects that can definitely help to improve the quality of life in communities where the violations have occurred.
Okay, and this is Mona from Tree Fresno. We have, so actually applying to the program was done before I came along, but I often reference our packet here that was put together along with very detailed budgets and a very detailed timeline, including of photos and potential projects and partners that we would work with. I find that there is a lot of maneuverability actually within the SEP. We do work regularly with Helena and Linda at the Community Outreach and Enforcement section. And I find that there is an ability, because we have begun this SEP in approximately 2016, and here we are in 2022, that some aspects of our projects have changed. And Brian alluded to, obviously, with COVID and working with schools can sometimes, if there is a monkey wrench in that when we're talking about these time-sensitive projects and former partners that we had that may not be involved anymore. So there's actually, we value here at Tree Fresno very much the that the outreach that Helena and Linda provide to us to be able to figure out how it is that we can most effectively move forward with a project that suits the SEP proposal. So, and ultimately our goal is to build vegetative barriers on properties that are controlled by our partners. And so sometimes that may mean that we choose the site within a school district that's most ready and most that the school district is interested in vegetating, as opposed to maybe a site that we chose in 2016. So I find that it's a very good source of funding. I think that it's very, compared to some of our grants that we receive through the state of California, there is enough funding to actually be able to complete a project, complete with irrigation, which is quite critical, especially here in Central California in the San Joaquin Valley. And we're also able to provide longer term tree care and maintenance so that we ensure, the longevity of those projects, so that we can take the air quality measurements that we need to in the future, and that those projects actually, those trees grow into maturity and benefit, the school community and the nearby neighborhoods. So I'm a big fan.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful. So, I mean, as I listen to this, there are a couple takeaways that I get from this. One is that while it's important to be specific enough in the application to be able to get people to want to fund the project and to understand what it is, it's also important to build in enough flexibility as your project evolves. The second thing I heard is that, the process isn't necessarily ideal from a timing standpoint. And that also has, I think, impacts on how the projects should be designed to be able to have enough flexibility for the timing aspect as well. And the third thing, one of the things I just heard from Mona that I thought was important is that it's important to be able to have communication between the SEP, the agency that's running the SEP program, and the people who are receiving the funds, to be able to communicate and handle these issues that sort of come up on a one-off basis as the project is implemented or evolves over time. Is there anything any of you would do differently, knowing what you know now? Or anything you wish the governments would do differently?
Well, I think, as everyone else has mentioned, COVID was a big challenge, and that the SEPs we had required working closely with multiple agencies, several cities, elected officials, schools, school districts. Many people, as we all know, were working remotely, offices and schools were closed. So coordinating efforts became challenging, but always in this instance of our SEPs, CARB was there to communicate with us, and we communicated in an ongoing fashion, perhaps too often sometimes, but I really wanted to keep everyone apprised that we were continuing to do our work. And in the end, because everyone worked together, all of our efforts were successful. And the positive result was we established new trusted relationships, and certainly look forward to more opportunities to bring programs to undeserved communities, not just in Southern California, but throughout the state, and hope that the programs we've successfully implemented can easily be replicated. That's certainly our goal at this point.
You know, on the requirement side, it was interesting. I guess I would recommend to state agencies. There's an interesting requirement to set up an interest-bearing account with the funds, which is not a big deal. But if you do the math on it, when you take into fees and things, it's oftentimes a wash. So it's a little bit of an administrative thing that I would definitely recommend to sort of looking at again, at least in our case. But, you know, I think that the other thing that's really interesting about SEP awards that is actually, it's not that different from grants, I guess. But what I was about to say is that in the case of the Kids Making Sense Awards, we had, you know, we had sort of one proposal, but 3 violators that all came in at sort of different times. It just makes it for an interesting administrative kind of challenge sometimes, you know, and then it may or may not sort of add up to the total amount. So it's just a little bit of tracking in that particular case. So I guess it kind of just goes back, Todd, to, you know, your takeaways, you know, which is that sort of finding that balance between flexibility, you know, in terms of how you apply. So.
And that was a good point Brian made. So for instance, we had believed that a check was coming soon for one of our programs, but it's not coming until September. So just understanding that you may have to figure out something in the interim if you have a you know, something that's time, you know, time bound. But it's definitely something that setting up the separate account for us was actually, I think, a very good idea. And that was recommended through enforcement. I think it's good for accountability. I think it helps us to keep that separate. And I always think of this as, you know, from an accounting standpoint, that we need to be able to kind of track every penny and every expenditure on it, just in case, you know, we should get audited on a program like this. So, but I cannot, you know, say enough about the community outreach and enforcement section. We would not be able to navigate our SEPs and make them happen, and if we weren't able to ask those questions as freely as we are. And if they don't know immediately the answers, our program officers, they'll go to their superiors and find us a way for us to move forward, or to have us adjust our plan so that we can move forward.
If I can just add just another note, from our introduction to SEPs in approximately 2016 to where we are today, the application and reporting process has been streamlined. It's easier to navigate, and there's even a Cali PA link that allows individuals to submit online. And so I also think I'd be really remiss not to applaud all the agencies who have created these team of dedicated staff who oversee the SEPs, especially in CARB, Warren, Linda, Helena, Natalie, Charlene, and even Deldy Reyes, who's in the 617 division. I think when we can all work together, that great things happen. And so I'm extremely appreciative of how this has kind of moved forward, and hope that, as Cynthia raised an issue of more community engagement and outreach, I know LAG Network is certainly committed to doing just that. And thanks everyone who is here today. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see Cynthia has her hand raised, and so maybe this is a good time to go to Cynthia first, and then to all of the attendees for their thoughts and comments and questions. Cynthia.
Thank you. So I know that some of the groups that have a better capacity, and I know you've touched on this already, have an easier, not an easier path, but seem to be able to apply for these funds. And so one of the things that I'm still very concerned about is how do we build the capacity of like groups like mine who are mostly volunteer based. We have a lot, we're, you know, designated as AB 617. A whole host of laws have been put into place to protect us. And we really need more support. And so some of the things, as I mentioned before about, you know, not knowing all the different things we could choose from with these steps, I think is really critical, and those conversations need to happen more as the communities on board and start getting more familiar with the SEPs. And I will speak to the Air Resources Board SEPs because that's kind of the air world that we're in right now. There's all kinds of things that come to mind. We may start off just trying to get a warehouse out of our community because we can't breathe. And then the next step is, well, what about the facilities that are there? And I hear Mona talking and about these vegetation walls, and I think our barriers, and I think that's where we're getting to now. And I think of our group and our capacity, and I don't know that I'm going to become the vegetation barrier guru. And so I would want to like try and plug into Mona. I also know with the air monitors, we wouldn't have even attempted to put purple air monitors in our community without the support of, you know, the Coalition for Clean Air. And so I think the ways, I know everybody in other groups are pretty busy, but I think there's got to be ways that we can afford ourselves of the benefits of the things that you've learned so that we don't have this big lag time in trying to, you know, understand the whole process and what's out there and just the whole menu of things that we can look at. And so I think that's really critically important. And I also want to make sure that we highlight the fact about flexibility in your timelines. So, you know, a lot of people don't think about that. They're in the moment, and it's really not giving the community all the benefit to be able to let them know, you know, you need to have a flexible project. And along that lines as well, you touched on it, but if a polluter is picking a project and you say you're going to make all polluters come into compliance and stop their polluting, well, you're likely not going to get picked. And so how do we frame our projects so that they are meaningful to the community, but they don't scare off potential funding? So thanks for letting me interject into the process here.
No, Cynthia, I think that's a really important point. And I think maybe I'll start with a capacity building question to Mona, Brian, and Robina. And then I think we'll move into Tim and Ben's portion of this, where we can talk about the administrators, because that might be part of the solution to some of the capacity issues. But before we do that, so let's, for Mona, Brian, and Robina, as far as, you know, capacity that you needed, what did you need to know to be able to develop and implement the project, take funding, and be able to do the reporting? What are some of the things you needed to know how to do?
Well, I can start here at Tree Fresno. Luckily, we had this history of the actual tree planting. So we're kind of specialists in planting 15-gallon, you know, drought-tolerant trees in this area. So taking it kind of the next step to the building, the construction of vegetative barriers, which is still tree planting, but it's planting in an area that has been vetted by, we utilize Sonoma Tech to make sure that the air quality is likely to improve in that area due to, you know, the wind currents, et cetera. So I think partnering with a knowledgeable organization, if you have that sort of specialist component, is important. We use contractors for our large scale projects. You might not guess it here, but we have basically 2 full-time people and a part-time person at Tree Fresno. So we wear a lot of hats, and we've also been, in business for 36 years. So our little nonprofit has learned to work with various landscape contractors who have worked with us on previous assignments, and obviously can utilize the tree plans and irrigation plans and have conversations about what's different about building those vegetative barriers than just planting trees. Usually it doesn't have to get more complex for them. We just show them basically, where on the tree plan that the project needs to go. So I think expanding our capacity is actually done through a certain amount of hiring, contracting when we need it, because this kind of work doesn't go on, 12 months of the year. If we're lucky, we may have like 2 of those barrier projects a year, and they do take quite a bit of coordination with obviously who controls that property. There's a lot of complexity when you're dealing with an entity such as Caltrans or various cities having to apply for encroachment permits, et cetera. So that falls on Tree Fresno for us to do basically what I call the negotiation of the planting projects. So once that is done, then we can bring in kind of the physical, the brawn to actually put in the project, and we stay in close contact with Sonoma Tech, making sure that they have a timeline established for their involvement in the project as well. So that's how we generally expand our ability to be effective in both urban greening and vegetative barrier projects.
Well, California Safe Schools has a very strict policy of never parachuting into other communities. If we're asked for help or collaboration, we will be there in a moment. But there are many underserved and very deserving communities who deserve help. And I think if I can just mention this, and it's not specific, but it happens not only in SEPs, but in grant process. I think it's really, really critical that anyone providing SEPs or grants or any kind of other funds to carefully review applicants and require documentation to support activities involving collaborations with other groups. Because too often, and I don't know if that's happened to others, but too often we're called by a group or organization or consultant who's received funding, but has no knowledge of or relationship in the area of their proposal. So including these letters of support are great, knowing that these histories of working together are involved with trust. And, because again, and Mona, you just mentioned it, when working with multiple agencies, time frames, are not time consistent a lot of times. And, you want things to move forward, but you can't. But if there were a challenge, that I would say it was just the reporting process, but I thank CARB for working with us on that and understanding the challenges that were there because of CARB and meetings that had been canceled and staff being replaced in the city and in county and even in DOT, Department of Transportation. So I hope that helps explain some of our challenges. Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge what Cynthia said as an inherent challenge of some of the SEP programs. And I'm sorry that I just don't have an immediate, answer to it. But I want to acknowledge it because it is a really challenge for a lot of the folks on this call. So, you know that literally environmental justice, that the polluters, where they're coming from, they're getting a violation, and the impact should probably be focused on them. So, with the SEP program, so you want to reduce those emissions, but of course, then if they're choosing the projects, that makes it an inherent challenge. I think that should be acknowledged that that's, you know, something that is a challenge with the SEP programs. I do think some of the other grants that like the AB 617 program, they still have that challenge, but and you know, Development Action Committee has been a great partner on so many of those, and many of you, I think, on this call have been. I think those are a little better situated, but it's certainly something to think through, and I just want to acknowledge it because I think it's really important. And I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you, but you know, the other thing about, you know, I think that you can do some framing though that does appeal, that gets to emission reductions, but it's a challenge, for sure, 100%.
So yeah, I think one of the things I hear in common from all three of you is, well, a couple things. One is that there really is an issue between the SEP and the violator choosing it, especially if the project isn't framed in a way that's relatively innocuous to the violator or defendant, whatever the word is you want to use. And I think also, and we've seen this in some of CARB programs, I wonder if some of the other programs have seen this as well, where certain types of projects are more easily fundable than others. So like school filtration projects for us have taken up a large amount of funding, both because they're really valuable projects, but also because it's an easy thing for a violator to choose. I'm putting air filters in schools. It's not going to affect, you know, me as a violator, for example. Whereas if you have a project that's designed around building capacity in the backyard of the company that created the original violation, they're obviously going to be less likely to fund it unless it's framed in a way that sort of minimizes that. The other thing I heard is that it's important part of capacity is not just based on your own organization, but it's based on networks of organizations. So maybe that's something we as a group can work on, is helping to build networks of organizations so that we have projects that can be more collaborative across different types of groups that then work together. The part of the challenge for governments, especially, you know, the groups that are trying to build these community focused SEP programs, is how to get down to the groups that need the funding the most. And those are the groups that tend to not be the ones that know how to apply very well because of the capacity issues that we're talking about. So building these networks might allow us to get deeper into the EJ community to be able to fund projects that are, you know, even more valuable than the ones we've funded to date. So I think that's a good lesson learned. One thing Cynthia just wrote, I'll read it out. So it could be appropriate to have projects with longer timelines with several components so that a SEP does not have to be written for each piece of a community's goal. That is certainly a possibility. One of the things I know CARB has done is we separate projects into pieces and then we fund a piece at a time. There are benefits and challenges to that. And I think Mona talked a little bit about that. So did Brian. But something to keep in mind. All right, so with that, we will come back to this portion of the panel as well for additional questions. But at this point, I'd like to shift to Ben and Tim on our panel, who represent organizations that we refer to as administrators. So these are groups that both receive funding, but then they also make funding available to community groups and grassroots organizations. So my first question to you, Ben, and to you, Tim, is what is the role you play in the SEP process?
I can go first. Thank you, Todd. Just as a recap, everyone, I'm Ben Harris. I'm the staff attorney for Los Angeles Waterkeeper. And I realized my bio really would focus on myself and not our organization, so I'll just say a little bit about what we do. LA Waterkeeper has been around for almost 30 years, since 1993, formerly called Santa Monica Baykeeper. And our primary mission statement is to fight for the health of the region's waterways and for sustainable, equitable, and climate-friendly water supplies. We achieve those goals through a variety of strategies, but one of the main ones that we rely on is litigation. It's one of the main tools that we see as useful to protect our local waterways from a variety of sources of pollution. And I guess you could say it's no accident that our acronym is LAW, L-A-W. I'm one of 3 attorneys at Waterkeeper, if you include our executive director, Bruce Resnick. So it's clearly a priority for our organization and typically continues that way. Law is uniquely situated as a nonprofit, but also as a facilitator for SEPs. And as a result, we see all sides of supplemental environmental projects similar to the Rose Foundation. We often receive SEP funding directly for our own projects through agencies or even indirectly through a foundation like Rose. And then we use that funding to carry out a specific project that we're working on. These days, our major focus in the SEP world is as a provider, which really occurs when we sue water polluters and we settle the case in a way that involves SEP funding that addresses the harm caused by the polluter, which is usually the alternative to civil monetary damages under the law. Through our litigation work, as a result, we are hoping to show another way that environmental justice groups and other small community groups can secure SEPs for their projects, and maybe already have from groups like Waterkeeper. There are three main ways that we provide SEPs from our litigation activities. The first one is an in-kind SEP, where usually the defendant itself, which most often would be an agency, does the SEP project on its own as part of the settlement. The other category is a direct SEP provision, which is where we provide funding directly from the defendant in the agreement to a particular NGO or community group for a specific project that is already contemplated. And then the last one is indirect, where we would send money as part of the settlement, not directly to an organization, but to a foundation like Rose, sometimes Liberty Hill or others, which then pools that funding and makes it available for other NGOs, which we'll hear more from Tim in a minute. And I just want to highlight that back in May, we released our litigation impact report, which highlights the history of our litigation over the last 30 years. And the result is that we've generated about $15.8 million in SEPs from our litigation activities. About half of that was dedicated to larger in-kind projects undertaken by municipalities or government agencies, like the city of Los Angeles in response to our lawsuit over chronic sewage spills about 20 years ago. But other settlements, have had direct or indirect allocations for SEP money in some pretty major ways. In one settlement with the County of Los Angeles over stormwater violations, we were able to procure $1.2 million that went directly to tree people to help 30 families in diverse communities across the county retrofit their homes to filter water and capture stormwater, which is, again, a way that addresses the harm caused in that case. We've also procured a $200,000 SEP from a settlement with a polluting waste hauler in Sun Valley, which went to Pacoima Beautiful. That was an indirect SEP through Liberty Hill. And that money was used to provide critical funding for the Bradley Plaza and Green Alley project that captures and filters urban stormwater runoff and provides a recreation corridor in that community. And as a third example, we reached a settlement with a waste hauler in the San Gabriel Valley that resulted in $20,000 that went to Amigos de los Rios, again, indirectly through the Rose Foundation, which went toward their groundbreaking Emerald Necklace project. So these examples highlight that really the vast majority of our SEP funding, of the SEP funding that we're able to procure ultimately goes to environmental justice groups and supports projects in underserved and frontline communities. I would encourage everybody to go to our website, www.lawaterkeeper.org, where you can read more about our litigation impact report and some highlights of some of the major SEPs that we've funded, and generally the incredible impact that our litigation work has had on the health of our waterways over the last 3 decades.
Thank you, Ben. That's great. I had no idea that was part of the work you did. That's really good stuff. So Tim, your ears must have been burning from earlier today. Can you talk a little bit about the role that you play in the SEP process?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And hi, everybody. And I guess before I kind of go into it, I also want to say, Todd, thanks for you're in your now 4th hour of facilitating all this kind of stuff. And so thanks for herding all of us kittens all day. And I really want to thank Cynthia and Robina for all the work that goes into putting together a conference like this. So thank you. So, I mean, you all heard my bio and stuff. Everything you need to know about the Rose Foundation is in our name. It's the Rose Foundation for Communities and the Environment. We're all about the intersection of people and the natural world. And people in the natural world intersect in all kinds of different ways. And I guess as a bridge, I'll say the Rose Foundation has intersected in the SEP world in a number of different ways. I'll kind of summarize it in 3 different ways. We've been a direct recipient of numerous SEPs. We're a third-party administrator with citizen suits brought by organizations like LA Waterkeeper, consumer protection organizations in California, up and down the West Coast, all around the country. And we're really proud that we've partnered with the Regional Water Board in Los Angeles, in the Central Valley, and a new partnership with the Central Coast Water Board to steer money that comes out of enforcement actions towards the community. And this panel mostly focuses on the government partner role, but I wanted to say a word or two about those other categories because that's our experience and that's our context. And that shapes everything I have to say about government SEPs. And I'm going to be brief, but you're going to learn I have a lot to say about this. At least I have opinions. So as a direct recipient, we have a youth program, works with high school students in Oakland and the East Bay, generally communities that would score way up in the top percentiles of Cal EnviroScreen. And we've gotten SEPs from Department of Pesticide Regulation, DTSC, Cal Recycle, CARB, at least. And I can tell you all those agencies, I mean, all branches of Cal EPA, all of them have completely different procedures, rules, and regulations and stuff they care about and don't care about in SEPs. And so the idea that Cynthia had about some kind of a roundtable amongst agencies to talk a little bit more about common practices and swap notes, I really second that. But our main experience with SEPs has been working with organizations like LA Waterkeeper. And over the last 30 years, we've received 600 SEPs at least. It's funded over 50 million in community grants and thousands of individual projects. And I think I mentioned the entire West Coast now, nationally. And there was a lot of discussion earlier about Nexus, and that is the fundamental thing. The money is coming from a pollution violation, and so the benefit coming out of the money has to, in one way or another, address the violation that occurred. I mean, that's what's fair, and we have religion on that topic. The way we've done it is we've organized this money into a series of funds. I put up our website earlier. I can do it again when I'm done talking. And you'll see kind of a dizzying array of grants funds. Almost all of those are funded by SEP or SEP-like things from some kind of litigation or cycles of litigation. So we organize it into funds so that you're not in a position of applying for money from a particular settlement. We have, say, our California Watersheds Fund, and when you go onto our website, you'll see that it funds twice a year, and you'll see that we have certain geographies in play, and those geographies change over the course of the year from spring to fall and year to year, depending on the flow of settlements. I guess what I want to say is that the main thing that we do that's maybe different than what Waterkeeper does, and why I think they see the value of working with us, is we take the money out of the little room, or now it's a little Zoom box, where lawyers who've been arguing with each other for months about a pollution violation, we take, and they've got it solved, right? They've agreed on what the solution is, and something's going to happen to address the pollution. And then it's time to say, well, in lieu of a penalty, or if this had gone all the way to court and gone all the way through, would have been way more expensive. So there's almost always
what do we really need?
Excuse me? There's almost always room to get some money to the community. And so in that instance, it's a question of people saying, who do you know? And there's a lot of people here in the room that may not be on that kind of first name basis with the lawyers negotiating the settlement. And so what the Rose Foundation does is we take that money, we take it out of the room, and we put it out there where people can apply for it on a fair and level playing ground. And I want to say something that's important about our philosophy in all of this. what the statute tells us, the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act or Prop 65 or the Consumer Protection Statute, what it's telling us is to use that money for the issue. Like if it was pollution in the LA River, the statute is saying we ought to use that SEP for some kind of project that's going to benefit the LA River. Well, we want to do that, and we're going to do that. That's what we have to do, and we have to report every single grant that we make to the court, to the US Justice Department, to the plaintiff and the defendant. But what we want to do on top of that, and what we do is focus on equity and justice. So we have to get to water quality, but to get very far in our grant making system, you have to focus on, you have a project around equity and justice that's doing something on water quality. So I want to get to one of the fundamental features of how it works in the citizen suit world and the consumer protection world, which is really, really, really different than government SEPs. In the citizen suit world, the discharger, when they agree to the settlement, sign the consent decree, they pay the money and they're done. I can't say that enough. They pay the money and they're done. So they have a tremendous amount of incentive to then to participate because they've agreed that they'll put some money out to benefit Santa Monica Bay or benefit the LA River or benefit Los Angeles Harbor, San Pedro Bay, whatever the nexus is. They pay the money and they're done. And they don't have any further liability. The Rose Foundation assumes liability for the nexus. We assume liability that we'll take that money and we'll show you the project that for the LA River or Santa Monica Bay or wherever the geographic nexus was that related. But we can't guarantee the 100% success of that project. No foundation ever can. We can guarantee our diligence, but this is the real world. We can't guarantee the 100% success, but that's okay. We assume liability for the nexus, and our accountability mechanism is similar to what you've heard from others. There's grant contracts, and projects have to report back on what they've done. We certainly have the ability to claw the money back if we feel that the project wasn't done successfully. But no matter what, the discharge is off the hook. And I mean, that's been the gateway that's helped us funnel over $50 million to the community. Now, when we get into the government partnerships, it works differently. I want to say in particular the Los Angeles Regional Board, and the other regional boards too, but I'll say Los Angeles because we're in LA, tremendously committed to making it work and to getting money out to the community. But there are some real differences in how the government SEPs work, which aren't community friendly. And I mean, it's kind of what's happened is we've taken well, let me start with this. First of all, in a governmental SEP partnership, you have to apply twice. First, you apply to get on an eligibility list, but you have no idea how much money there might be. You don't have any idea when you're going to get the money. And you don't even know if you're going to get the money. So you have to have a kind of a very vague and open-ended project, yet you have to be extraordinarily detailed and specific in your work plan and your timeline and your deliverables. I mean, that's a challenge. And that's one of the things we do is help groups navigate that. But then so there's a project list that gets created that's eligible. And then when there's a settlement moving, generally we and agency staff will take a look at the project list and maybe pick 2 or 3, and then they get shown to the pollution discharger. And if the polluter likes the project, and we've heard some discussion about that, you know, the polluter has to pick the project. There's an aspect of a beauty pageant there, which I would have to say is not very good state policy. But that's the way it's set up. And it stems back to how SEPs were originally, as our first speaker from EPA talked about, the original SEPs were the idea of a cooperative polluter who would go above and beyond compliance and do an extra project on their own property. So it made sense for them to design and own the project. Community SEPs are completely different, but we need to evolve our thinking now to catch up with community SEPs. So but a project gets picked off the eligibility list. Well, then the applicant has to redo their entire project application because it's been at least several months. It's often, we heard some timeline, I thought earlier today, that was kind of optimistic of a year to 18 months. We've had on our LA Water Justice project eligibility list so far in 2.5 years, 1 SEP has been funded. All those other projects have been on there for over 2 years. And we've got a process where we update the list and we roll them over, and that's pretty painless for the groups to update, but that's just eligibility update. They're still going to have to apply again for the real money when they get a chance at it. And the longer time it goes from the initial application to when the real application happens, the harder the second application is. I mean, essentially what you've got is you've got kind of an uneasy bolting between a government contracting process on the one hand and the kind of thinking that goes into that, and a sincere desire to have a community-oriented, community-friendly grant-making process. And it's kind of like, you know, when the spaceship and the space station have to kind of dock with each other. I mean, it's an uneasy docking. So it leads to a really protracted process. And it's a process that doesn't allow a lot of flexibility. We've heard a lot of conversation about flexibility and some examples where there's been real flexibility shown, but the default design doesn't lend itself to flexibility. And it tends to select towards bigger groups who can navigate the process and groups who are not going to piss off the powers that be because they're more likely to get picked. And then we get into a final challenge, and this is unique to the water board realm, and it comes out of the state water board. It's not just a question of if the money isn't spent properly, then it can be clawed back. Well, of course, that's standard grant making. It's not just a question of if there's some money left over, it should get refunded. Well, of course, that's normal grant making. It's a question of if the pollution discharger picks a SEP, they have to sign as part of their agreement or commitment that if for any reason whatsoever, the project is not 100% completed, they have to pay 100% of the money a second time to the state. And that is, in legal circles, that's called a chilling effect. And it is an issue and a problem, and it's something that a lot of people are sincerely trying to address. But it seems to be unique to how the State Water Board interprets things. I could go on, but I think I've probably already said plenty. Let me stop here, and thanks very much for listening.
So Tim, thank you. That was a lot. So I think one of the things I'd like to do at this point is open up for questions for the entire panel here. One of the things I'd like to, everyone to focus on is to think about your comment, Tim, I thought was really good, is how do we evolve our thinking in these programs, both from the community side and the government side, to be able to catch up to the concept of community SEPs so that we can make this work in a more streamlined fashion. So I don't know if there are thoughts from either the panelists or from those of you who are listening and also participating in this symposium. So any questions from the public or thoughts or thoughts from the panel? Feel free to raise your hand or type your comments in the chat. Tim.
Yeah, thanks. My number one suggestion, we've talked about small SEPs. Russ raised this. I mean, they get a few really big ones, and then they get a lot of really small ones. But right now, the way the rules are set up, it can be a $5,000 one, it can be a $10,000 one, it can be a $500,000 one, and it's handled exactly the same way. The quickest thing we could do to open up a community-friendly lane for SEPs would be to allow the pooling of these smaller settlements. And we could even preserve nexus. We could say, well, we'll pool these into a Santa Monica Bay nexus. We'll pool these into an LA River nexus. We'll pull these into an LA Harbor nexus. We could work with that. We have to do that in the citizen suit world anyways. But then that would let us have a pool of money that we could make award grants to organizations in real time, and a small group who doesn't know how to play the game of imagining a timeline that they might not even get to start for a year, they could apply for a small grant and there'd be real money right there. And other state agencies do it. And in fact, the State Water Board does it for science SEPs, the Delta Regional Monitoring Program is a pooled fund. And I think if it's okay to do it for science, it's okay to do it for the community. We could pool the smaller SEPs, and that would immediately open up a funding pathway and take out all kinds of red tape, streamline the administration, and that means money's going to the community and not paying administrators.
I think that's a great thing to think about, Tim. So I see Sophia has her hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was very impressed with the panels today, and Tim, what you just finished stating is important because I'm in East LA, Boyle Heights area, and we are in ground zero of Exide and all the other facilities that were built on the east side because the city of Los Angeles in 1930 voted to do that. And so our concerns are projects coming, and we have a project coming, which is the Sears project, where they want to house 5,500 mentally ill people together with people who are dealing with substance abuse. And to us, it's a crime against humanity to do that. And also to put it in an area that's already contaminated. And so I was interviewed yesterday by Channel 4 and the LA Times. So these are projects that are coming. And you mentioned earlier that, you know, these grants are given to people who are not going to rock the system. That's why we are a coalition, and because we deal with the bootlickers on the ground that play nice with the politicians. And so not only are we trying to fight this project, we're dealing with a councilman who's not responsive. So, you know, we're recalling our councilman. And so that's the reality, you know, and right now to get, I'm glad I'm participating because I'm looking at all the earmarks that are in an area, but projects that are coming because there's a project where they want to do affordable housing, and this is coming, it's coming quick, and they want to circumvent CEQA because they're going to say it's a homeless crisis. And so this a project like the Sears project or any other part in the state of California can pop up anywhere, and they will circumvent CEQA. And so no one in the legislation has said, you know, in these areas where there's contamination, these areas should be exempt. Why would you build affordable housing in an area where it's already ground zero? And two, why are they trying to put developers exploiting people who are mentally ill, the most vulnerable, people who are dealing with drug addiction, the most vulnerable, in an area that's already contaminated? And for people of culture and color, that to us is ethnic cleansing. So how can we partner? Because to me, I'm sounding the alarm, and that's why I jumped in on here, because of what's coming, the legislation that's coming, or that's being proposed to circumvent CEQA and bypass local municipalities. And so I just wanted to share that with you. That's the struggle we're in the middle right now, and boots on the ground. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to organize with COVID, but also because of special interests that are behind these projects. So I just wanted to share with you what we're doing now, but I want to collaborate with everyone on this call to help prevent what's coming with developers taking advantage of the situation. And we should be opening mental hospitals, not trying to put the homeless in a facility just because the Olympics are coming. And we saw what happened in 1984 when they swept everybody off the street. And they're trying to put them in a facility the proposal is just unacceptable. And so scary. And I hope you guys can assist us as we push back against this huge project in the 14th district, the city of LA. Thank you.
Sophia, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a definitely, you know, these types of CEQA issues. I mean, you're highlighting a very specific one, but these types of land use and CEQA issues and trying to build community involvement in CEQA is something that's sort of important from a capacity building standpoint. So perhaps that's something that, you know, we can work on, you know, also through the LAEJ network to think about, how to build capacity to be able to push back on CEQA when it's appropriate. Wanted to turn it over to Ben for his comment question.
Yeah, thanks, Todd, and thanks everyone for great insight on this call. It's really great to hear what everybody is working on from different perspectives and the challenges that they're facing. I kind of wanted to address Todd's question about how to streamline SEP availability and collaboration, but also highlighting a challenge that I think is somewhat unique to LA Waterkeeper given the litigation angle, but also is a great way for that to facilitate that collaboration. In particular, when we commit to lawsuits against water polluters, one of the current hurdles that we're focused on is the idea of standing, which is a legal doctrine in federal court that basically says if you want to bring a claim in federal court, which is obviously very important for the Clean Water Act, we need to establish that our organization has standing to sue. And standing means we identify a person that qualifies as a member of our organization and that member is harmed by pollution of their local river, creek, coastal water, whatever the water body may be. And this is a really critical way, in our view, for community members to stand up personally and fight for their rights for clean water and for a clean environment directly within their own communities. It sounds simple enough, but standing is getting really difficult and hard to prove after some recent legal decisions. The Supreme Court is arguably focused on that in the future. So our members have to be, the way we interpret it, they have to be closer to the specific stretch of waterway that's being polluted. And the effect really is that it's just much harder for us and for communities to exercise rights to protect themselves from harm directly in their own communities. Waterkeeper, we're countywide, but we don't necessarily have that many standing witnesses at every corner of the county. So one of the calls that we're always making is we would love to work more with EJ groups, community-based groups throughout the county to help identify standing witnesses that will allow us to continue enforcing clean water laws against polluters, whether it's industrial facilities in your communities or other sources of pollution. There's just I see a lot of areas that there's pervasive problems, especially if you're around the ports with water pollution. A lot of industry buildings that are just not very well kept. They don't have great housekeeping, and they're pretty evident when you just look at it that there's going to be a lot of stormwater problems. And we see a lot of benefits of partnering on standing. Our suits help the polluters clean up their acts. They provide SEP funding as an added bonus to help alleviate the harms caused by those pollution. And it really helps reinvest directly in the communities that are impacted by the pollution. So I just want to put out a call that we're always accepting people to join our standing network, help us continue our great work to make SEP funding available for more groups. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat after this. But I just do see that as a really great way for NGOs and community groups to interface with each other to create this kind of a collaborative network, which sometimes is lacking. But we've heard a lot is that there's almost sounds like an inside game, if you will. But we're always available and willing to help other groups identify resources for SEP funding, identify grant opportunities, and even potentially in the right circumstances be a direct recipient of SEP funding from our activities.
Thank you, Ben. I think that's a really great point. It points to the importance of sort of the community network side of this. So I know we're getting pretty close to time, and we're going to wrap up at 2. In the interest of time, I wanted to go through a few things that I've heard that I think are areas where we might be able to continue work going forward to continue to improve these programs and some of the capacity and other issues that we've identified through the course of these panels today. So in general, I've kind of heard 2 groups of things. One is related to building capacity, and the other is relating to structure and communication about the government programs. So I'll start with the structure and the government side of this. That one of the things we've talked about is potentially having an agency roundtable that could help share lessons learned from different types of programs that have been implemented, and can also help those government agencies that are interested in building out their programs from a more traditional SEP program to a more community benefit focused program. And so One of the things that I think maybe we could talk about, Cynthia and Robina, in the context of the network is possibly finding ways to support those discussions. And I think as part of that also, we've talked about the lists that, Cal EPA has a list, and then there are some linkages that some agencies are building with grant programs so things that aren't funded for grants also go on this list. I think we could do more of that potentially and build out on the list some, be clear about what the nexus is so that other agencies that were interested could also go to the Cal EPA list potentially as a repository and identify projects that might fit their specific need. So I think there are things like that we could do in the context of an agency roundtable. And then on the capacity side, one of the things I've really taken from this discussion is the need to build out community networks even more, and to be able to support some of the smaller organizations in understanding how to, in building their capacity so they can apply for and obtain these grants as well. And one potential pathway for that is also the use of administrators, as Tim has highlighted, where groups like the Rose Foundation can be used both as aggregators of smaller funds to be able to fund individual projects where the nexus is handled, to also being able to alleviate some of the burden from governments, especially when they're going through large numbers of programs and have essentially become recipients themselves. So I think there are areas where those groups can work both individually and together to help strengthen these programs and also help build capacity among the community organizations to really achieve some of the goals that these programs have been set up to try to achieve. So with that, I think I'll toss it back over to Cynthia and Robina, and then maybe if there's any final questions. But thank you for the opportunity to moderate today. I really appreciate it, and it's been a great discussion. What Helena is putting up right now are links to email contacts for each of the programs that we've talked about today. And then there's a following slide also that you'll see in the recording for this presentation that provides websites for each of the programs we've been talking about. So I want to thank everyone for their participation today, and I'll kick it back over to Cynthia and Robina. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all the attendees and your thoughtful comments, to our phenomenal moderator, Todd Sachs, and all of the exceptional presenters as well, to CARB's Helena Rim. Thank you for your incredible technical support, and Mary Zakrasik for overseeing the chat. We'd also like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Community Environmental Services, California Air Resources Board, Earth Justice, Los Angeles City Attorney, the California Environmental Protection Agency, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, Honorable Sheila Kuehl, Janice Hahn, Holly Mitchell, and Hilda Solis, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, Cal Recycle, and we want to remind you very quickly, we're having our next workshop, and we hope that you'll join us. The date is Wednesday, August the 17th, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. The topic is lead, common exposures, protections, and enforcement. And the goal of this webcast is to increase awareness about sources of lead exposure and related health effects, and to promote opportunities for lead prevention, screening, and mitigation, and discuss opportunities to reduce the harmful impacts of lead. Again, thank you to the co-coordinator of the LAEJ network, my close colleague and friend, Cynthia Babbage, and to all of you, thank you so very much for your participation today. Thank you.